Several years ago, the kingdom of Pars, led by their king Andragoras III, was known to be the most powerful kingdom in all of Europe and Asia. During his lifetime, Andragoras has led his warriors to dozens of battles and have come back victorious each time. In the year 317, Pars's arch-enemy, Lusitania, invaded Pars's ally kingdom, Mariam, in a fit to aggravate Pars and draw them out of their kingdom. Days after hearing such news, Andragoras arranged for over 290,000 men to fight the Lusitanians and reclaim their ally nation, Mariam, back. The battle lasted for hours and hours on end until the Lusitanians were all brought to their knees. The Parsian army shouts out the victory cry as the war comes to an end. Several thousand meters away, the crowned prince of Pars, Arslan, trains with his father's right-hand man, Vahriz. Like all other training sessions, Vahriz refuses to take things easy with Arslan. Arslan complains a bit and ends training for the day. Then, they discuss the qualities a king must have. Arslan is a boy with a kind heart, who thinks slavery and wars are unnecessary. However, Vahriz tells him, power is the only way to seize control of his kingdom, and to do that, you have to prove to the people that you're able. Arslan thanks Vahriz for his concern and walks up to the balcony of the kingdom to show himself to the soldiers. He sees his mother and tries to speak to her, but she ignores him and continues on to her room. Knowing his mother, Arslan keeps roaming around the palace until he finds his two best bird friends, Azrael and Sarush. Arslan extends his hands and Azrael lands on it. Just then, Kishward, one of the knights of the kingdoms, walks in to complain and compliment the birds. After getting close enough, Kishward kneels to inform Arslan of his father's return to the kingdom. At that moment, Andragoras and his captains return from battle and are given a royal welcome by the commoners. A few boys in the crowd talk about the valor and bravery of their warriors passing in front of them and wish to become like them later in the future. They see the POWs they got from war and talk down on them. Arslan, on the other hand, arrives on his horse to greet his dad. However, Andragoras ignores him and keeps on riding his horse slowly to the palace. Arslan leaves his father's side and walks to other parts of town, accompanied by a guard. At a point, he waltzes into the slave trade section of town and finds several other people putting prices on the Lusitanian POWs. Not so far away, three runts move too close to a Lusitanian child soldier's cell just to startle him. What they didn't know was that the child soldier already had a hidden blade in the sole of his shoe. He releases himself and takes one of the kids hostage. Arslan and his bodyguard were nearby then, so when the soldier frees himself, he takes Arslan hostage and rushes through the town square to escape the soldiers. Along the line, the cavalry captain of the kingdom, Daryan, aka Vahriz's nephew, is informed of the situation. He stops what he is doing and rushes to find Arslan. In the meantime, Arslan and the child soldier evade all the guards and they jump through roofs and balconies to escape. One time, the child soldier nearly falls down a balcony, but Arslan saves him. Around that time, a giraffe shows up and scares the child soldier, but Arslan tells him not to worry, that it's a harmless animal. The child soldier continues to find a way out of the city. Arslan calms him down and shows him around Pars. When the child soldier sees that slavery has been practiced in the kingdom, he complains and tells Arslan that their kingdom preaches strongly against it. Arslan tries to keep up with the angry kid as they argue facts about their kingdoms. In the end, the kid makes Arslan believe that all men are equal before the creator. Then, he carries Arslan and finally makes it to the city's south wall. Elsewhere, Andragoras returns to the queen's quarters, hoping to see a happy woman. Unfortunately for him, the queen is as uptight as ever, and Andragoras is pissed. After reaching the edge of the south wall, the kid soldier jumps down to the river with Arslan. Daryan arrives shortly and is shocked to see what happened. As the kid soldier steals a horse to escape the city, Daryan takes out his bow and aims at the kid. Arslan begs him from the foot of the wall to stop firing at the boy, so Daryan misses his shot on purpose. When the hubbub dies down, Daryan gets down to retrieve the crown prince. On their way back to the palace, Daryan and Arslan face the three runts who allowed the kid soldier to go free in the beginning. Arslan allows the guards to free the runts as they do not know what they are doing. Arslan keeps on moving and thinking about what that kid soldier said to him back then. He senses something weird in the city and rushes over to check on the POWs from earlier. There, he finds out that they've been taken out already as the slave traders saw them as useless. Arslan gets a horse and rides back to the palace. On his way there, he asks Daryan some pretty hard questions, but Daryan tells him he'd get his answers when he ascends to the throne. Arslan makes a few jokes about his father and returns to the palace safe and sound. 3 years later, Lusitania lays siege to the kingdom of Mariam yet again. This time, Andragoras takes his 300,000 men and his son, Arslan, who was 14 at the time, on his first battle ever to prove his worthiness to be king of Pars. A few hours before Arslan is taken to the battlefield, he trains with Vahriz and gets beaten again. Once training is done, a messenger from the king tenders a missive from Andragoras. On opening it, Vahriz finds out there's about to be a war, and so it begins. The kingdom of Pars heads out to the battlefield to give Hades more souls for his kingdom. Lusitania also marches tall and strong to face the almighty Pars. Although their army seemed small and negligible, they marched almost like they had something planned for the Parsians. Nonetheless, the Parsian march on, neglecting any traps the Lusitanians may have set for them. All 8 cavalry captains are called on to this battle to ensure the Lusitanians are wiped out totally from the face of the earth. Arslan, who's one of them, explains the dexterity of the Parsian army to Arslan. Azrael the bird arrives a little while later to report his findings. Arslan notices the dampness of Azrael's feathers. Arslan notices this also and rushes forward to further scout the area. Arslan smiles and sends Azrael back to scout the battlefield. Later that day, a fog covers the entire barren land. Arslan is left alone with the 3 runts from 3 years ago. Now they're fully fledged soldiers who are more than happy to protect Arslan. They pledge their loyalty to Arslan and kneel to his power. Just then, Vahriz shows up and scolds Arslan for straying too far away from protection. He proposes they have a bout there to settle things, but Arslan begs for his forgiveness. At that moment, one of the guards rushes to call Vahriz back to the main camp. It seems Daryun had done something to incur the king's wrath, and may risk being deranked. Vahriz rushes back to the main camp and finds his nephew telling the king about a trap the Lusitanians may have set for the Parsian soldiers. Andragoras, being the bashful and arrogant king he is, refuses to listen to reason and urges his cavalry captain to quit saying such stupid words. Daryun, who has the kingdom's best interest at heart, urges the king to retreat his forces and replan their invasion of the Lusitanian army. He thinks someone amongst them has betrayed them and relayed their entire battle plan to the Lusitanians. Still, Andragoras keeps insulting Daryun's intelligence. He even goes as far as insulting his old-time friend, Narcissus, the artist. As Daryun is about to speak, his uncle, Vahriz, arrives shortly and smacks Daryun for being so insolent towards the king. He begs the king for some mercy, and Andragoras allows Daryun to fight on the battlefield and prove that he's still worthy to keep his cavalry captain status. Daryun apologizes for speaking out of place and leaves the king's tent. Arslan arrives shortly to see his dad, but he's soon shunned and sent away. Right outside the king's tent, Daryun apologizes to Arslan for his insolence earlier. Arslan tells him it's okay as he continues on to do his thing. As they watch him go, Daryun tells his uncle about Andragoras' harsh treatment of the crowned prince. He wishes the king would treat Arslan less harshly. Vahriz shuts him up and tells him to refrain from speaking about the royal family. He then goes on to talk about a few more important things with his nephew, and tells him when the time comes, he would be glad to make Daryun the right-hand man for the king. Moments after their discussion, the battle horn is sounded and everyone gears up to go fight the Lusitanians. After gearing up, Andragoras gets a little information about the enemy count of the Lusitanians from Arslan. According to Arslan, the enemy has about 30k cavalry forces and 90k foot soldiers. One of the scouts rushes forward to inform Pars that the enemy is advancing towards them. Andragoras raises his sword, speaks the blessing, and begins the war. Arslan and every Parsian soldier let out a battle cry that brought war on the Lusitanians. The Lusitanians lie and wait for the Parsians to enter into their trap. When the time is right, the Parsians get close enough and fall into the oil-filled pit the Lusitanians dug earlier on. After losing around 20k soldiers in the pit, the Lusitanians shoot arrows of fire into it and burn all 20,000 Parsian soldiers. The Parsians still move forward to fight the Lusitanians, but then again, they fall into the next trap as the Lusitanians shoot thousands of arrows at all of them, killing around 3k soldiers at that point. The real battle then begins, and the 3 runts from back then fight with all their might to protect Arslan. At a point in the battle, Arslan is left alone and forced to fight a Lusitanian soldier. Thankfully, his years of learning and experience helped him in this fight, as he killed the soldier. Arslan, upon finding out he's made his first kill, gasps for air and searches the battlefield for his father and Daryun. A few meters away, 2 Lusitanians play around with Arslan's helm. Daryun catches up to them and ends them in an instant. Arslan and his people find Arslan and turn against him. It turns out Arslan was the traitor that sold the Parsians to the Lusitanians. Arslan cannot believe his eyes as he wonders what would have made him turn against his kingdom. He tries fighting Arslan, but he's then subdued. Arslan apologizes for his betrayal, but then mentions that he plans on taking down the entire bloodline of Andragoras, so there can be peace in the city. Just as he's about to thrust his sword at Arslan, Daryun arrives to save him from Arslan. As the battle goes on, the worshippers of the Lusitanian gods are shown praying for their people's victory in the battle. Before going to search for Arslan, Daryun meets with his uncle who tells him to go search for the crowned prince while he himself protects the king. Now that Daryun has found the crowned prince, he has to fight and take down all who stand in front of him so Arslan can survive. Naturally, Karlan shows his true colors and disappoints Daryun with his betrayal. Daryun then understands the reason why Karlan had told him to report his findings to the king. He wanted Daryun to incur the king's wrath just so that he would lose credibility in front of the king. Karlan gives Daryun a smug look and forces him to come in for an attack. Daryun takes out a few Lusitanians with Karlan and faces the traitor himself. After telling Arslan to keep calm, Daryun faces Karlan, who retreats immediately. With Karlan gone, Daryun gets off his horse to meet with his crowned prince. In the meantime, Andragoras is in between a rock and a hard place. Varese advises him to withdraw from the battle so as to live to fight another day, and also preserve his soldiers. However, Andragoras remains adamant. In the end, Varese convinces Andragoras to retreat, so Andragoras tells his soldier to sound the horn. At that point, Karlan's sleeper cell soldiers use the fog as cover and secretly attack the soldier carrying the horn before spreading rumors to the other soldiers about the king deserting them. The morale of the other soldiers dies immediately, and they're put under even more despair and confusion. Suddenly, the men begin to shame King Andragoras as the Lusitanians keep up with their attack. The cavalry captains begin quitting their jobs. One of the cavalry captains, Shapur, tried to reignite the fighting spirit in the soldiers, but it was already too late as the Lusitanians were already attacking them. Elsewhere, Vahriz and the king, Andragoras, ride a secret passageway to Pars. Unfortunately for them, the Lusitanians saw them coming and laid an ambush there for them. They fire several arrows on them and take out all of the king's entourage. When they're done, the leader of the Lusitanian army arrives to take down the king and Vahriz. Vahriz immediately jumps in to fight the guards. He manages to take down a few small fry and comes near the leader of Lusitania. The leader shames Vahriz for his insolence and takes him down in one single motion. He then faces Andragoras and eliminates him as well. Elsewhere, Daryun finds Arslan a horse and urges him to ride with him somewhere safe. He mentions a few important things to Arslan and begins their journey to the safe spot. On the way, they find an injured soldier on his horse and rescue him. In his final moments of life, the soldier informs Daryun that his lord, Shapur, has already lost his life in battle. As for the king and Vahriz, they also met the same fate. The soldier gives up the ghost. After paying his respects, Daryun lets Arslan know that the king always had a soft spot for him. Arslan is shocked as he always thought his father hated him or something like that. Daryun thinks long and hard about things and tells Arslan to accompany him to his friend, Narcissus' place, outside Pars. In the next scene, the soldiers of Lusitania return home to their base camp thinking they've won. When they let their guard down, a few thousand remaining Parsian soldiers rush to attack them on fire. The Lusitanians are shocked at the severity of the Parsian army. They return the attack to the Parsian army and wipe them out completely. Montferrat, one of the Lusitanian generals, walks with his friend Boudin to discuss some philosophical nonsense about war and death. At a point in their discussion, one of the soldiers reports the assassination of the king of Pars, Andragoras, to them. Arslan and Daryun continue moving towards Narcissus' house. Arslan asks a few questions about this Narcissus of a guy, and Daryun tells him he was once a highly respected individual in Pars. However, he was banished from the land when his opinions began to contradict Andragoras' own. They kept on talking until they got to the Forbidden Forest. Daryun tells Arslan that Narcissus liked to paint but was still banished. Just then, an arrow flies past Arslan and Narcissus' servant, Elam, warns them not to come forward. Daryun introduces himself and calls Elam out to take him to Narcissus' place. Elam shows up and takes the duo to Narcissus' place. On getting to the entrance, they find Narcissus there already waiting for them to come by. Narcissus opens his door to greet his long-term friend, Daryun. The duo tease each other like old times before Daryun introduces Arslan, the newbie, to Narcissus. Narcissus sees his visitors and asks his servant, Elam, to prepare a meal for them. When Arslan sees Narcissus' art for the first time, he gets very shocked and recoils in disgust. When their dinner is done, Arslan and Daryun settle down to eat the delicious kebab prepared. While eating, Narcissus explains to Arslan a few more pieces of information about his history in Pars. 5 years ago, when the three kingdoms, Cindura, Turan, and Turk attacked Pars, Andragoras sent Narcissus and his father and 5,000 cavalrymen to fight the enemies. However, Narcissus lost his father and returned with less than half of the said cavalrymen. He was there in the palace to tell the king that he freed his slaves and reduced his army size by a huge bunch. By that time, the senators and chiefs were already laughing at Narcissus. Narcissus had one final request, and that was for the king to let him go fight the alliance with the remaining men he had left. Andragoras, thinking Narcissus would ask for some more men, gets the shock of his life when Narcissus tells him to leave things in his hands. Eventually, the king allows him to do his thing, and Narcissus disappears with his men, only to return 3 days later, to free the 2,000 POWs in Partian land. While the soldiers attack him for doing such a treasonous act, Narcissus urges them to be patient and watch the alliance turn against each other. Apparently, Narcissus had spread rumors around the three alliances, telling them one would betray the other. To make matters worse for them, Narcissus freed the POWs earlier to provide proof of his rumors. As such, the kingdoms turned against one another and took themselves down, completely forgetting about Pars. Arslan is completely in awe over Narcissus' prowess. He continues eating his food as Narcissus asks for an update on the battlefield. Daryun tells Narcissus that they were betrayed by Carlin. Although Narcissus is impressed by the savagery of Lusitania, he still prefers to steer clear of trouble. Daryun gets pissed off and begins to tease Narcissus for his weird take on the matter. After all the playing, Narcissus tells Arslan that his father should have abolished slavery when he told him to do so. He also mentions that that's why Andragoras hated him so much. Arslan matures at that point and tells Narcissus it's all good. Following their meal, Arslan leaves the old friends to themselves and goes to sleep. That night, Daryun and his friend reminisce on old times, over a mug of beer and wine. Daryun reminds Narcissus about the last words of his uncle to him before the battle. Variz had told Daryun to swear loyalty to only Arslan when the time came. The next morning, Arslan wakes up and steps outside to find Narcissus drawing the horizon. He walks to the kitchen and finds Elam preparing breakfast. Eager to join and help, Arslan breaks some of the wares there and apologizes for ruining things for him. Elam packs the broken wares and explains a few things about Lord Narcissus and the slaves he freed back when he was in Pars. He himself was once a slave before he was freed by Narcissus. Arslan asks him why he chose to stay with Narcissus, and Elam says he did so of his free will. Suddenly, Arslan remembers the moments he had with the child soldier a few years ago. At that time, some of Carlin's soldiers approach Narcissus' house to check for Daryun and Arslan. Initially, Narcissus makes a fuss about Daryun leading the troublesome soldiers to his home. However, Daryun tells him he has no choice at this point but to save them. Narcissus immediately hides them in his attic and attends to the soldiers when they arrive. After denying ever knowing Daryun and Arslan, Narcissus asks the soldiers about a few details of the war. Daryun hears it from the mouth of the soldiers that his uncle is already dead. He makes a slight sound and draws the attention of the soldiers who sense something up there. The soldiers get more suspicious and keep on questioning Narcissus. Narcissus gives them sus answers, and the soldiers invite Narcissus to join Carlin's army. If he does so, then Carlin will return to his former glory. Narcissus gets irritated and insults Carlin in front of his army. The soldiers get very angry and push Narcissus. Narcissus immediately activates the trapdoor under them and throws them several feet down into the puddle of water below it. Just then, Daryun and Arslan come down to the attic to mourn Variz's death. Moments later, they all have breakfast and discuss their next move. Carlin's soldiers try to climb out of the trapdoor, but Narcissus throws them back inside. Elam notices the silence in Daryun's face and asks him what's up. Narcissus teases Daryun, hoping to bring him back to normal, but Daryun is already far gone in thought. Arslan asks Narcissus to help them, and in return he would make him a court painter when he becomes king of Pars. Narcissus laughs out loud and praises Arslan for being a good negotiator. It was then that Narcissus offered his full loyalty to Arslan. After hearing and accepting Arslan's offer, Narcissus and his servant Elam pledged their loyalty to Arslan's cause. Moving on, Narcissus tries to send Elam off to one of his friends who lives near the coast. This is to keep Elam out of the troubles of war. Elam, after hearing all Narcissus had to say, refuses to leave Narcissus' side. Narcissus tries to argue with him, but Daryun and Arslan give Narcissus reasons why he needs Elam on his side. After settling things, Elam follows Arslan to go prepare the horses for their ride into the royal capital. When they're done, everyone rallies up and rides for their next destination. Moments after their escape, the soldiers Narcissus trapped in the floor earlier on manages to crawl out of the space only to find out that their horses are gone. Narcissus and his people stop over by a cave to rest and watch things happening all over the forest. Elam goes out to scout the forest and returns with information about Carlin's soldiers. He tells Narcissus that the soldiers have been positioned all around the forest and are searching desperately for them. Narcissus smiles and tells Arslan that they'll be staying at the cave for a while. During their time there, they would wait for the soldiers out and convince them to think they were somewhere else. Narcissus explains several other things that prove his role as a master strategist. When he's done, he asks Narcissus if he truly plans on taking the same path as his father, Andragoras. Arslan tells Narcissus he's never been so bashful and arrogant in a million years. Narcissus smiles and becomes more confident in the king in front of him. At Peshawar Fortress in the kingdom of Pars Kishward, one of the cavalry captains receives the horrible news about the battle in the plains of Atropatene. From the information gathered, the king is missing, and the warriors from Lusitania were already on their way to the front gates of Ecbatana, aka the royal capital. Kishward immediately orders his men to close the gates, so the Lusitanians have a hard time entering the kingdom. Moments after the gates are closed, the Lustanians arrive with Shapur, another cavalry captain, all bloodied up and tied to a stake. The Lusitanians take their stand in front of the gate and threaten to torture Shapur to death if they don't open the gates for them. Naturally, the Parsians refuse to cave into their demands, so the Lusitanians begin tormenting Shapur's strong body without any respect for his status. When the pain and shame become way too much for Shapur to bear, he begs his own people who were watching over him from the walls to kill him before the enemy does. The soldiers from Ecbatana understand his plight and begin shooting arrows at random spots on the ground. Just then, a cloaked archer shoots a single arrow from the top of the walls and hits Shapur on the head. Shapur smiles and appreciates the shot from the archer before closing his eyes to death. The archer smiles and returns to Pars. The queen at the time, Tahamane, witnesses the happenings around her kingdom and gets very scared of the enemy as she thinks they may somehow breach their walls. The Lusitanians, after killing Shapur, raid the walls in front of them and begin climbing them. Meanwhile, the archer from earlier finally meets the queen of Pars. He introduces himself as Jeev, the traveling musician, to the queen. The queen thanks him for giving Shapur an honor and even grants him a pardon for the crime. As they discuss, one of the maidens speaks up and accuses Jeev of being a liar. She claims that she spent the previous night with him, and he told her that he was a prince. Jeev ends up embarrassing the lady, but the queen asks him to prove his skills in music. He's given a banjo to play, and does so graciously. The queen, alongside every member in that courtroom, was awed by his musical prowess. He dedicates his song to the thousands of Partian soldiers fighting the Lusitanians to keep Pars safe. When he's done with his performance, the queen thanks him for his performance and pays him a meager amount of gold for his services. Elsewhere, Narcissus and Daryun discuss the strategies Lusitania plans on using to open the Partian gates from within. Narcissus tells Arslan that although the Partian gates are strong enough to keep them out, the Lusitanians still have an ace up their sleeve. He suspects they may incite violence from within the walls and force the slaves within the Partian walls from within. Well, this was exactly the plan of the Lusitanians as they climbed up the Partian wall and spoke to the slaves there to help them break down the wall. In return, the Lusitanians would free and allow them to roam Pars freely. Arslan, after realizing the plan of the Lusitanians, urges his people to get up and get ready to save the royal capital. However, Narcissus tells him the four of them can't take down an entire army just yet. They still have to keep calm and wait for the right time to take down the Lusitanians from the inside. At that point, the words of the Lusitanians echo in the minds of the slaves trapped in Pars. Lord Garsh, a warrior of the southern Partian wall, is called upon by his soldiers to see the horror the Lusitanians have shown them. When he gets close enough, he sees Variz's head and the heads of a few others. The queen, upon hearing about the horrible sight, faints a little and is helped back up by her maidens. In the meantime, Sam, another one of the cavalry captains, joins up with Garsh to talk about their recent sightings. Garsh asks Sam why the queen never for once asked after Arslan. Sam ignores the question and keeps talking. Just then, they find the slaves trying to rebel against their masters. Garsh rushes towards them and uses violence to keep them in check. Sam follows up and tells him not to use violence to solve things. Just then, some soldiers rush to tell them about the slaves, who just set fire to the temple. Garsh and Sam ride to the temple and kill off 10 rebels. Sam warns Garsh against killing the slaves recklessly, as this would only incite more violence within them. Right after Sam finishes talking, another soldier rushes towards them to inform them that there is slave trouble at the north gate. At that point, Sam meets with the queen to inform her of the growing rebellion among the slaves. He advises that the queen free the slaves and allow them suitable rewards, just so they can calm down. The queen dismisses him after telling him she'll think about it. Sam takes his leave shortly afterwards. Jeev the archer is seen observing the kingdom from a high balcony eating an apple. While eating, he recalls his previous meeting with the Grand Vizier of Pars. From the meeting, it's discovered that Jeev is on a mission to escort the queen secretly out of the palace. The war between Pars and Lusitania rages into the night. By that time, Jeev is already escorting some high-profile persons through the sewers of Ecbatana outside the kingdom. Meanwhile, Narcissus and his people cook up a plan on how to single Carlin out of his soldiers and take him down when he's alone. Narcissus suspects that Carlin can never find peace as long as he knows Arslan is still alive. Being the traitor he is, there's a high likelihood he would have trouble garnering the truth of the Lusitanian soldiers. This means he would be making his own move very soon. They just have to wait. As they trek through the sewers of Ecbatana, Jeev lets the person he's traveling with know that she's not the queen. The person gasps in surprise, but Jeev tells her not to worry about that. Still, the woman tries to force him into escorting her out of the capital. She even takes out a knife to attack him and ends up kicking Jeev in the nuts. As Jeev goes down in intense agony, the foolish woman runs away out of their path and falls into the hands of a man in a silver mask. She asks for his identity, and the man tells her he's the one destined to bring justice to Pars. The woman then peers around him and finds Carlin next to the masked fellow. When she's not looking, the masked fellow chokes the woman to death and presses on. Along the way, they're stopped by Jeev, who challenges them to a fight. The man gets irritated at Jeev's insolence and attacks him blindly. Jeev throws some fire at his face and blinds him for a little while. The masked man gets angry and tells his men to take care of Jeev while he continues his journey to the palace. Jeev takes down the men in a single flowing motion and decides to steal a little treasure before moving on. While at it, he hears a few more men coming his way. This time he decides to avoid trouble and just hides out of sight. Just outside the sewers, Sam and his people notice a fire at the royal palace. Sam rides his horse to the royal palace and finds the Lustanians all raiding the place. Firstly, they free the slaves in their dungeons and let them fight alongside them. Sam arrives at the palace and finds Carlin there. Without thinking, Sam attacks and asks Carlin why he deserted their army to the enemy. Carlin remains silent and allows the masked man to come nearer to Sam. When he's close enough, he takes Sam out. At that moment, the Lusitanian soldiers finally open the gates to the capital. Garsh dies in the stampede as the royal palace is raided and taken over by the kingdom of Lusitania. Thankfully, a priestess from the temple was sent by the queen to search for Arslan, and Narcissus set out with Arslan and the others to trap and capture Carlin. Back in the capital, the soldiers of Lusitania are seen beating and interrogating the slaves and commoners for the location of the queen of Ecbatana, Tahamane. Shortly afterwards, their Fatso king shows up to take the throne of the Ecbatana. As the unrest within the capital grows, the silver mask man walks around annoyed at the savagery of Lusitania. He keeps his plans silent, waiting for the right time to strike. Word has it that Tahamane was captured by the man in the silver mask and is to be presented to the king of Lusitania. Now there's a terrible fate that befalls the men who fall in love and marry Tahamine. Even her former husband, Andragoras, had to kill his brother just so he could have her all to himself. The people she was married to before him also fought and killed each other before they could have her hand in marriage. Naturally, the Lusitania king's subordinates expect him to shun such a marriage. However, they get the shock of their lives when the Fatso king actually tells them his wish to marry the queen. Almost immediately, the prince of Lusitania, Guiscard, aka sensible brother of the Fatso king, receives the horrible news about his brother's plan to marry Tahamane. Hearing this, Guiscard leaves whatever he is doing and rushes to the palace immediately. He finds his brother in the treasure and tries to talk sense into his head. However, the king was already in her trap. Guiscard even reminds him of the terrible fate that befalls those who marry the queen. Still, the king tells him nothing is going to happen to him. Guiscard rushes back to his quarters and throws a fit over his dumb brother's mistake. The silver man shows up and tells him to calm down and wait for things to play out. When the time is right, they will strike. Guiscard discusses a few more random things with him and ends the meeting shortly. The streets of Pars are in chaos after the war, as the Lusitanian soldiers behave rashly and take anything they want without pay. A familiar teenage boy from the Lusitanian army finds a certain giraffe from 3 years ago. He rushes towards the stall to ask them if they knew about a particular boy with white hair. It's then revealed that the teenager was the boy Arslan freed 3 years ago. He was back there to search for his long-lost friend. Carlin, being the betrayer he is, begins to ponder about his life moving forward. The silver mask dude comes by and tells him to quit worrying and just get his men ready to strike. Carlin nods in agreement and walks out of the room. On his way, he overhears some Lusitanian soldiers making fun of him and keeps his head down. Meanwhile, the boy sits by a fountain reminiscing on old times. At one point, Carlin's soldiers begin a parade in the streets, and the commoners gather around to watch the traitors walk with their heads held high. Amongst the crowd, a lady in a white cloak stands nearby to witness the parade. One of the Lusitania soldiers approaches her and takes her to an alleyway to harass her. On getting there, the girl removes her disguise and kills the soldier. The boy from earlier senses the occurrence happening around him, so he follows the soldier and the girl to the alleyway, only to find the soldier already dead. The boy gets very suspicious and asks the woman to reveal her true self. The woman keeps her cloak on her head and tries to run. However, the boy removes the cloak forcefully and finds out that the girl is actually a boy. Before he could make out any meaning to this, the slaves find him and flock around him to ask for their reward for helping the Lusitanian soldiers. Elam, who was the disguised girl, escapes the boy and returns to his people to report his findings. There, Narcissus anticipates Carlin's moves. If one were to think like Carlin, who's a wicked strategist, one would burn every village around the vicinity just to thin out the number of hiding places Arslan could seek refuge in. Arslan, after hearing about the horrible things Carlin could be doing, gets ready to leave their hideout to search for Carlin. Daryun and Narcissus iron a few more things out before joining Arslan on his trip. In the mountains of Pars, Jeeves' travels land him in the hands of some Lusitanian soldiers. He ignores them until he finds a damsel riding moments just after they pass him by. Out of concern for the woman's safety, Jeeves gets down and decides to follow the woman just so he can help save her from the Lusitanians. Lo and behold, he finds the woman being harassed by the soldiers up front and rushes to help her. Surprisingly, the woman took down more than half of the soldiers attacking, leaving Jeeves to take out the few that remained. Once the soldiers are off her back, Jeeves gets close to her and tries to introduce himself. However, the woman ignored him completely. Jeev shouts out to the woman, who stops to hear him out. Jeev introduces and praises himself to the woman, who is unimpressed. After cutting down his wings, the woman introduces herself as Ferengis, a priestess in the temple that serves Mithra. Hearing this, Jeev still tries to praise himself to her. However, Ferengis tells him she's busy searching for a place to lodge for the night. Jeev stops her and asks why she is traveling all alone. The priestess tells him she's currently searching for Arslan. That night, Carlin and soldiers massacre a small village in their search for Arslan. The villagers were quite confused as to why soldiers from Pars would be attacking a village in Pars. Little did they know that they'd been betrayed by their murderer. After being bewitched by Ferengis' beauty, follows her like a guard dog, listening to everything she has to say. At one point, Ferengis gets tired of his presence and asks him why he is following her. Jeev tells her he was bewitched by her beauty and would follow her to all ends of the earth. Ferengis ignores his words of flattery and rides forward. Jeev struggles to keep up until Ferengis stops again to observe the lay of the land. She takes out a whistle and blows some air into it. Jeev is unimpressed as he couldn't hear anything from the whistle. Nonetheless, he keeps on talking and offers his undying loyalty to the beautiful Ferengis. Ferengis tells him he can tag along with her as long as he remains loyal to Arslan. Jeev sighs and eventually agrees to serve Arslan. They ride a few meters forward and find the soldiers from Carlin's army riding the forest, searching desperately for Arslan and his party. A certain young man who calls himself a porter, planted by Narcissus to trick Carlin, arrives at Carlin's camp. There, he tries to offer the location of Narcissus and his people to Carlin. Initially, the man, who was all beaten up, told Carlin that Arslan and his people were traveling south of them, but Carlin saw through the deceit and killed the young dude. He fails to see the second trap set by Narcissus, who already knew he would figure his first trap out, and decides to go north to catch Narcissus unawares. To make things even better for Narcissus, some of Carlin's guards rush in to report seeing some evidence of Narcissus and Arslan's party traveling north. Hearing this, Carlin wastes no time in following the false tracks blindly. He ends up taking his soldiers into the ravine with only one entrance and exit. Narcissus scouts the ravines from above and finds Carlin walking right into his trap. Just then, he's attacked by Ferengis and Jeev. Narcissus makes it known that he's with Prince Arslan, so Ferengis stops attacking Narcissus. She and Jeev team up with Narcissus and his people to bring Carlin down. Somewhere nearby, Elam gives Arslan a bow and some arrows to fight himself when the battle begins. When the soldiers are deep enough, Arslan reveals himself to Carlin from on top of the ravine. Carlin, blinded by his lust to kill Arslan, orders his soldiers to go take him down. Arslan and Elam use their weapons to take down more than half of the soldiers climbing up the ravine. Narcissus also uses smoke bombs to take out the soldiers on the ground silently. Unable to see a thing, Carlin's soldiers begin to lose morale as they think they're under attack by 1,000 soldiers. They kept wondering how many soldiers were attacking them. To make matters worse for them, Elam shouts out Daryun's name and tells the soldiers that he's there with his army to attack them. Just then, the soldiers get so scared that they all begin to retreat, leaving Carlin alone to face his problems. Carlin refused to back off as his goal was just in front of him. He rides his horse up the ravine and finally catches up to Arslan. Before fighting him, Arslan asks him for the reason why he betrayed his country. Carlin refuses to give an answer and just charges towards Arslan. At that moment, Daryun arrives to save Arslan from death. He turns his horse to face Carlin and engages him in a fierce duel to the death. At one point in the fight, he makes Carlin believe he was blindsided so he would attack blindly. However, when Carlin is about to take him down, Daryun uses the back of his lance to hit him off his chest. Carlin falls off the sloppy terrain and stabs his throat with his own spear. Daryun and Arslan rush to talk to him before he loses his life. Carlin the traitor takes a last glimpse at the people in front of him and smiles. Daryun asks him for information on the king's whereabouts. Before he dies, Carlin tells them the king is alive and well, but he still doesn't know where he is at the moment. Moments after his death, Ferengis introduces herself formally to Arslan. Jeev joins her and expresses his purpose to serve the future king of Pars, Arslan. After all the necessary introduction, Arslan asks Ferengis to offer up an elegy for Carlin's fallen men. Even though they were traitors to the kingdom, they were still citizens of Pars. Jeev is both surprised and disgusted by Arslan's behavior. However, he refuses to think too much about it as long as he gets to stay with Ferengis. Daryun and Narcissus contemplate allowing Ferengis and Jeev on their team. Narcissus tells Daryun that having 2 more added to their team is much better than having just 4 of them. Daryun nods in agreement. Somewhere deep in the dungeons of Lusitania, the Silver Mask dude introduces himself to Andragoras as Hilmes, the son of his late brother, Osroes, who he killed to be with Tahamane. It's been 16 years since the incident happened, and Hilmes wanted Andragoras to take a very long look at him, the rightful heir to the throne of Pars, and watch it happen. After his meeting with Andragoras, Hilmes is summoned by a fellow masked man. There, he gets to know about Carlin's death and the people who did it. Hilmes frowns and wonders where the pesky Arslan is. Now that his ace, Carlin, is dead, he has to get back to the drawing board to restructure his plan. Before leaving, the other masked man tells Hilmes that the Parshan sun shines not just for him alone, but for Arslan as well. If he's not careful, Arslan may become the next king of Pars right under his nose. A few days after Karlan's death, Narcissus and Daryun infiltrate Pars undercover to discover the dungeon where Andragoras is kept. In the meantime, Innocentus, the king of Lusitania, finds his bride-to-be, Tahamane, sitting in the palace yard, moves close to her and tries to make her laugh. Tahamane, who's disgusted by him, keeps shut and just listens to the nonsense he has to say. Meanwhile, the Archbishop of the Lusitanian creator, Bodan, gets very frustrated at the king's rash decisions of recent. He blames the king's misfortune on Pars, and gets so angry that he begins to burn all the sacred historical texts in the royal library of Pars. By nightfall, Bodan sets fire to every sacred text they could find in the library. Even some of the soldiers try talking Bodine out of burning everything. Bodine, however, gets angry and punishes anyone who speaks against him by burning him in the fire. Innocentus, the king, sits nearby with his fat butt scared of the madman in front of him. Daryun and Narcissus are amongst the crowd that gathered to watch their library get desecrated. They promise to pay Bodin back in his own coin. The following day, Jeev finds Ferengis alone on her horse in the forest. He gets close to her and begins teasing her beauty. Ferengis gets tired of his jokes again and walks away. Jeev keeps trying harder to capture her attention. However, the duo stop talking when they find Lusitanian soldiers passing by. Arslan and Elam, who are seen preparing to enter the kingdom, talk about the troubles one may face there. At one point, Elam gets up to fetch some water in the village nearby. Arslan convinces him to let him follow him to the well, and Elam lets him. Elam and Arslan sneak up to the well near the village and find it filled with water. Arslan tries to fetch up some water with the pail, but he accidentally cuts the rope and throws the pail into the water. He gets very embarrassed and rushes to hide in a little shed, while Elam goes to find another pail they can use. After Elam's gone, Arslan spots a few soldiers harassing a man to surrender his daughter for their satisfaction. Naturally, he can't allow this to slide, so he picks up an axe and faces the soldiers. Just as the soldiers are about to deal with him, the boy from 3 years, who was later identified as Captain Etoile, shows up and commands his soldiers to free the lady and her father. When the soldiers are gone, Etoile takes a hard look at Arslan and recognizes him as the guy who helped him 3 years ago. Since they never knew their names, Etoile was completely in the dark about Arslan's true identity, and he thought Arslan was just some spoiled rich kid. Arslan refuses to reveal his true identity just yet and just plays along with him. Etoile keeps pouting over his new status and position as captain of a small army of men. He then moves forward to complain about the notoriety of the great Andragoras and his son, Arslan, making sure to mention that they would soon be accepting the faith of Yaldabaoth. Arslan keeps quiet and looks at the poor boy. After his explanation, Arslan asks him why Lusitania would invade Pars if they all thought men were equal. Etoile gets pissed and starts getting aggressive. Just then, Elam arrives and draws his sword to protect Arslan. Arslan quells the growing unrest in the room and then breaks the bad news to Etoile about his friends from back then. After hearing about his dead friends, Etoile gives Arslan the holy book of Yaldabaoth and leaves. By nightfall, Narcissus and Daryun keep scoping out the streets of Ecbatana under their disguises. They walk towards a pub and run into a drunk who talks smack about them. Daryun shows the drunk his face and the poor man runs away screaming. Narcissus splits away from Daryun and intentionally leads some of the people following him to an alleyway. There, he smites all except one and questions him on the location of Andragoras. The poor man begs for his life and tells them he truly doesn't know the location of the dungeon. Furthermore, he tells both Daryun and Narcissus about Innocenti's proposal to Tahamane. Narcissus and Daryun spare the guy and keep on moving. A few minutes later, they find the masked man looking down on them from a balcony. Without thinking, Daryun attacks the masked man and breaks his silver mask to reveal the terrible burn on Hilmes' face. Hilmes gets very annoyed and begins to get serious with his attack. Narcissus joins in the fight and introduces himself to Hilmes, who doesn't seem to know who he is. After the intros, the trio begin to fight up until the guards show up. Knowing that they're clearly outnumbered, Narcissus and Daryun steal some horses from the stables and escape the capital to strategize. After fleeing the capital successfully, Narcissus and Daryun return to the cave to meet with Arslan. There they explain their findings to the young prince and contemplate the way forward. Arslan advises they find more allies so they can be strong enough to take down the Lusitanians. However, Narcissus tells him to calm down and focus more on being the king and leave the strategizing to him. A few hours later, about 400 soldiers discover Arslan's hideout. Thankfully, they're able to get on their horses and get out of the cave in due time. The soldiers give a hot pursuit, but Arslan and his people manage to take down a few of them as Daryun searches for a safe passageway to their next hideout. He finds one and quickly rejoins his party so they can all get there in one piece. With about 400 soldiers hot on their tail, Arslan and his people can only pray they get there in time. When all hope seems lost, they finally approach their new hideout, which turns out to be Kashan's fortress. Now Kashan is said to be one of the last remaining fortresses still serving the old Pars, so Arslan and his people are welcome there. Immediately after passing through the gates, the soldiers climb over the wall of the fortress and fire hundreds of arrows at the Lusitanians. Once the Lusitanians are dead and Arslan's fully settled, Hodir, the lord of the fortress, prepares a feast for Arslan. While eating, Hodir begins to talk excessively to Arslan. At some point, he tries to introduce his 13-year-old daughter to Arslan for his hand in marriage once he becomes king. However, Arslan ignores his discussion and tells him he plans on freeing slaves and making all men equal once he's free. Judging by how many slaves Arslan met outside Hodir's building, he had hoped Hodir would be against him. To his surprise, however, Hodir actually agrees with his plans. After eating, Hodir instructs an entourage to escort Arslan and his party to their respective rooms. Arslan is taken to his own room and made to stay there alone. This doesn't sit well with Daryun, but with much persuasion from the others, he allows Arslan to be alone in a room. A few hours later, Hodir visits Arslan in his room to discuss something with him. Daryun and Narcissus contemplate what Hodir may have planned for Arslan tonight. Narcissus, who's already thought it out, tells him that Hodir plans on making sure his daughter marries Arslan, so he can secure a future as a member of the royal family. After his meeting with Arslan, Hodir humbly takes his leave. Arslan gets to the balcony of his room and climbs the walls to get to the window of his people. Elam and the others sense him coming and nearly attack him, if not for the control Elam had. Arslan rejoins his people to discuss his meeting with Hodir. According to Arslan's words, Hodir counseled him against freeing the slaves, as it would destroy Parshan traditions. To make matters even worse, he tells them that Hodir asked him to consider marrying his daughter. Narcissus laughs at being and tells Arslan the next course of action. In the meantime, Ferengis senses someone by her window. She silently opens the door and nearly throws Jeev several stories down. However, Jeev tells her he wanted to charm her, as he was with a message from Lord Tactician, whoever that is. Daryun, on the other hand, recalls the last moments he had with Carlin and gets up from his bed. Narcissus, who was sleeping close to him, asks what was wrong. Daryun gets worried and asks Narcissus if Arslan is truly Andragoras' real son. Narcissus tells him it's not possible, so he shouldn't worry too much. At that moment, Elam comes from the ceiling of their room and shows them the sleep-inducing substance Hodir had hidden in the room's ceiling. Narcissus frowns at the cheap tactic Hodir is using to take them down. They all suddenly hear a brief commotion outside and quickly hide themselves to trap Hodir in his own plan. Thinking Narcissus and Daryun fell under his trap, Hodir rallies up his men and gets them very close to Arslan and Narcissus' room door. Hodir knocks on Arslan's door and waits for him to open it. When he opens it, he tells Arslan to give the soldiers the command to take down Daryun and Narcissus. Hodir was still under the impression that Narcissus and Daryun were asleep from the substance. He also thought Arslan was a spoiled boy that he could manipulate easily. Arslan asks for the reason why Hodir wants to eliminate Daryun and Narcissus. Hodir tells him it's because they're the ones infusing these horrible ideas, like abolishing slavery in his head. Arslan keeps his head calm and explains to Hodir just why Narcissus, Daryun, and the others are so important to his campaign. He walks outside his door and calls for his people to leave Hodir's castle. Hodir follows Arslan and his people outside his house and tries to get his soldiers close to them so they can stab them with his daggers. Ferengis sees through his trick and knocks the soldiers down. Hodir loses his shit and orders his soldiers to attack. Daryun gets off his horse and warns the soldiers against fighting someone like him. The soldiers understandably step back from the fight. Hodir orders his archers to shoot arrows at Daryun and the others. Thankfully, Elam's plan had worked, as the strings of their bows were cut down. Hodir gets really pissed this time, and orders his men to capture the crowned prince. The soldiers rush towards the traveling party, only to get beaten down by the lot. Daryun gives Hodir one last warning to back down. Hodir ignores him and rushes towards Arslan to kill him. Daryun thrusts his sword inside Hodir and leaves him for dead. After Hodir's death, Arslan goes to the slaves' dungeons to free the slaves. Rather than appreciate the help, the slaves get really annoyed at Arslan and charge at him to avenge their master. When they get on safe grounds, Arslan asks Narcissus why the slaves acted the way they did. Narcissus tells him it's because they all preferred serving under a generous master than going outside to forage for themselves. Arslan then discovers something new about enslavement and begins considering another approach to his kingship. However, Narcissus tells him to keep taking the path to righteousness and that it will pay off very soon. Arslan heeds to his advice and mentions their next destination, Peshawar. At Peshawar Fortress, Bahman, another cavalry captain, finds an important scroll left to him by Variz before he died and wonders what to do with it. Back in the royal palace of Ecbatana, Guiscard and his subordinates visit King Innocentus. There they find Bodine, the archbishop, trying to convince the king to approve their request to offer the lives of the Parshans as sacrifices to their maker. Guiscard and other sensible subordinates find this request very ridiculous, and they don't hide it. They even argue with Bodin for having the audacity to demand that from the king. Amidst the argument, Guiscard tells Bodin that this act of his may cause a huge rebellion from the Parshans. However, Bodin doesn't seem too worried about that, as he believes his 300,000 army of soldiers are good enough to take down any rebels from the Parshans. Guiscard still tries to combat his claims, and Bodin shocks everyone by telling them that his holy warriors are arriving in Ecbatana any moment from then. Just then, the warriors carrying the holy flag of the Lusitanian creator, Yaldabaoth, arrive at the capital. Sam, who was thought to be dead, wakes up from his sick bed and keeps on wondering why he's still alive. While he's at it, Hilmes, the silver mask dude, shows up and introduces himself to Sam who opens his eyes in shock. After hearing all he has to say, puts on his mask and takes his leave. In the meantime, Arslan and his people continue their travels to Peshawar. Arslan recalls his discussion with Narcissus the previous night. He gets so lost in thought that he forgets to make a stop and rest their horses. Elam stops by to remind him to stop, and Arslan gets back to his normal self. The duo discuss a little about Elam's future and continue moving. Gilan, after noticing Arslan's actions, gets surprised and asks Narcissus why Arslan never behaves like royalty. Narcissus tells him it's because he has a caring heart and doesn't take people for granted. Gilan smiles and begins to appreciate the king Arslan would become. Elsewhere, Hilms is seen checking out his scarred face in the mirror. As he struggles to forget, his memory takes him back to the most horrible night of his life. The night when Andragoras set fire to his dad's room with himself and his dad inside. Hilms had to endure severe burns to his face just so he could escape alive. After coming back to reality, a maid enters his room to clean it up. Hilms harasses the woman a little bit before asking what she's really doing there. The maid tells him he has a visitor, and Hilms puts his mask back on to meet his visitor. On getting there, he finds out his visitor is Karlan's son, Zande, who was there to seek permission and manpower to track Daryun down and avenge his father's death. Hilms scoffs at Zande's confidence and gives him what he needs to track down Daryun. By nightfall, Ferengis recites some chants to the river and figures out something strange. Apparently, from her findings, there are some bloodlusting individuals on their trail. She quickly informs the crew about it so they can act accordingly. Moments after their discussion, the Lusitanian soldiers arrive with Zande as their captain. Narcissus and his team continue riding further into the forest to lose their pursuers. Along the way, Narcissus and Daryun sneak out from the others and ride back to take down their pursuers. Ferengis joins them a while later and takes down as many enemies as she can. It goes on for a while until Zande shows himself. He calls his men a disgrace for being so weak against Daryun and his army. He unsheathes his long sword and challenges Daryun to a duel to the death. Zande doesn't give Daryun time to react or answer him. He just charges towards Daryun and impresses him with his immense strength. When it comes down to it, Ferengis shoots Zande's horse down and incapacitates him for a while. While Daryun actually had the chance to take him down, he chooses to let him live and continues on with his people to catch up to Arslan and Elam. Elam, Gilan, and Arslan, however, face their own enemies as they run into some Lusitanian soldiers up front. They quickly take out the few that followed them and begin riding as fast as they can to escape the enemies. Unfortunately for them, the enemy doesn't let them go as they shoot arrows at the three of them. One of the arrows hits Elam's horse and he falls down. Instead of abandoning him, Arslan returns to pick up Elam. He takes out one of the guards there and picks Elam up. Gilan then throws a few gold coins on the ground and distracts the soldiers so they can make their escape. This seems to work as they all escape to a cliff. The enemies, the trio hide just down the cliff, so when the enemies come, they think they jumped into the river below the cliff. Well, this plan works, and the enemies lose sight of them in due time. A few hours later, when they're safe, Elam asks Arslan why he saved him back then. Any royal would have left him in the hands of the enemies. Arslan, however, tells him he went back to save him because Elam is his friend. Nothing more, nothing less. Elam gets very flustered and thanks Arslan for saving him. Gilan humbly calls for the crowned prince Arslan to ask him about his days as a child. Arslan tells him he wasn't raised in the palace like the other royal kids. Instead, he was made to stay with the commoners up until he was of age to enter the palace. Gilan now understands why Arslan is so cheerful and down to earth. He smiles and begins to look forward to the kind of king Arslan would become. Narcissus, on the other hand, rides alone to scout the lands in their path. After riding a few meters, he spots some horsemen with weird tattoos on their faces. It was then he realized that they were from the Zot clan. Clan is a clan well known for raising bandits and thieves. Narcissus hides out of sight and watches the Zot clan and their leader Haltash clash with Hilms and his own squad. Haltash issues a note of warning to Hilms and his soldiers to leave their gold and sword for them to plunder. Hilms, who couldn't take such disrespect, slices Haltash in half, killing on that spot. At that point, all hell breaks loose and the Zot clan members attack. Takes all of them down and leaves a little girl, Alfarid, aka the daughter of Haltash, behind. Alfarid frowns at Hilms' reluctance to fight her and attacks him with her weapon. Naturally, Hilms knocks her down and tells her to stay down. However, Alfarid, being the adamant girl she is, spits on his face and pisses him off. Just as Hilms is about to take her down, Narcissus shows up and interrupts their little charade. Alfarid escapes Hilms' sword and asks Narcissus to borrow his weapon so she can use it to take Hilms down. Narcissus refuses to give her his weapon. Instead, he steps up and challenges Hilms to a duel. After fighting it out for a few minutes, both parties understand their strength and pause their fight. Narcissus looks up to check whether his trap will be activating very soon. Thankfully, the signs are positive as long as he buys enough time to keep Hilms there. Hilms, on the other hand, is none the wiser, as he tries asking Narcissus to switch sides. Narcissus smiles, refuses his offer, and then runs away as the rocks from above slide down to crush Hilms and his soldiers. Moments after the disaster, Hilms still stands tall as he searches the plains for Narcissus. Just then, a sorcerer using earth magic to travel through the ground reveals himself and laughs at Hilmes for losing Narcissus. Meanwhile, Narcissus had escaped with the girl, Alfarid, from earlier. When he's there safe, he gets off his horse to rest it. Alfarid begins shedding tears for her dad and the people who lost their lives that day. When she gathers enough courage to stop crying, she finds out Narcissus' name and rides with him. On their way back to the others, Narcissus lets the girl know that the rock slide that happened earlier was his doing. When the girl doesn't believe him, Narcissus begins a crash course on the laws of physics. Tired, Alfarid asks him not to bore her, and instead asks if she could tag along with him next time. Narcissus asks her if she has any family to return to her back at her clan's place. Alfarid tells him there's nobody of importance that she would like to return to. With each passing hour, the unrest between Innocentus, the king of Lusitania, and his subordinates grows larger as they begin to lose trust in him for proposing to the terrible Tehamini. One night, the commander of the Temple Knights, Hildigo, was assassinated by someone from Guiscard's army. To make matters worse for Bodine, he was assassinated by a worldly woman from Pars. The following day, Bodine approaches Innocentus and accuses him of taking Hildigo out to prevent Bodine from getting stronger in terms of military force. Innocentius, the scaredy cat, asks his younger brother Guiscard to come to his aid and let Bodine know that he never killed anybody. Guiscard, who knows exactly what's happening, Bodin for his commander's death. He mentions that since the commander was killed with a harlot by his side, he's no longer worthy to be allowed to call himself holy. Guiscard puts Bodine in his place and warns him never to pass his boundary again. He's an archbishop, nothing more, nothing less. After that meeting with the king, Bodin takes his holy knights and leaves the Ecbatana. Arslan and Elam continue their journey to Peshawar. They come across a legendary city and discuss a little about it. Jeev, who's a few meters in front of them, calls their attention to Peshawar, which was just a stone's throw away. Daryun and Ferengis keep riding to catch up to Arslan and the others. Zande refuses to give up the chase and finally catches up to them again. Upon reaching them, he challenges Daryun to another death duel. This time, the earth travel sorcerer helps him out. Daryun and Ferengis take note of the sorcerer and try their best to keep away from him. Zande charges at Daryun and attacks him with all his might. The earth sorcerer gets too close to Daryun and almost takes him down. Thankfully, Arslan arrives in time to take down the sorcerer. The sorcerer takes advantage of the ruckus to charge towards Arslan to take him down. Daryun quickly sights what's about to happen. Seeing as he was pinned down by Zande, Daryun summons his inner strength and breaks free from Zande. Then he rushes towards the sorcerer and waits for him to materialize before stabbing him. When he's done, he rushes back to Zande and takes his weapon away from him. Zande notices he's outnumbered and tries to run away. Ferengis, out of pity, shoots an arrow at him and knocks him down. Daryun apologizes to Arslan for neglecting him, but Arslan tells him it's okay and that he owes his life to Elam, who was there at the right time. Arslan's mature thinking moves Daryun so much that he swears to keep protecting the little prince till he dies. This time around, he's protecting the man Arslan is to become, and not the throne anymore. After swearing his loyalty to Arslan, Daryun and his party pressed on to the fortress of Peshawar. They run into some Lusitanian soldiers on their way and are attacked by them. Thankfully, Kishward, Azrael, the bird, and some other soldiers from the Peshawar fortress arrive just in time to take down the Lusitanians. They kill off a few of them and send the others packing. After the hubbub, Narcissus arrives with Alfarid and reunites with Arslan. They all gather around to say hi to Kishward and his soldiers. Arslan is more than happy to see one of his father's allies alive and well, and wishes to see more of them. After the necessary introductions, Arslan and his people sight Alfarid near Narcissus and ask for her identity. Alfarid lies and tells them she's Narcissus' wife. Arslan and his party are met with the shock of their lives. They talk about this recent development as they enter the gates to the fortress of Peshawar. On seeing the crowned prince, the Partian soldiers in the fortress all cheer and welcome him back to their company. On their way in, Arslan and his people complain about Narcissus' recklessness with Alfarid. When he gets tired of all the babbling, Narcissus urges Alfarid to tell them the truth. Alfarid smiles and tells the others that though they're not officially married, they still love each other. Narcissus frowns and tells them that he saved them from the silver mask guy. Just then, Bahman, the lord of the Peshawar fortress, shows up to greet the crowned prince. Arslan, upon seeing him, asks for his help to take down Lusitania and reclaim their kingdom of Pars. Bahman and Kishward offer their undying loyalty to Arslan and his cause. By nightfall, Hilmes, aka the Masked Man, arrives at Peshawar and begins plotting a way to infiltrate the fortress stealthily. In the meantime, Arslan finds Jeev complaining about Daryun being too close to Ferengis recently. He apologizes on Daryun's behalf, but Jeev tells him it's okay. He then goes to ramble on and on about beauty and pursuing women, and pretends to understand. In another room, Alfarid finds Elam preparing Narcissus' clothes and things. She teases him a little bit and lets him know that she will be taking care of Lord Narcissus from then on. Elam takes offense to her words and begins to argue with her overlord Narcissus. The arguments get so heated that Alfarid has to walk out on Elam out of annoyance. Up next, Alfarid visits Ferengis in her own room to complain about Narcissus ignoring her. Ferengis tells her to keep calm and let Narcissus finish his mission for now, as he is busy and would rarely have time to pursue some woman. Alfarid nods in agreement. At that moment, Arslan is seen in Kishward's room talking to him about Azrael the bird and his owner Sarush. Kishward tells him he had sent Sarush and his people on a mission a while ago, but they haven't returned. For all he knows, they may have been killed. Arslan clenches his fist and promises to raise an army there in Peshawar and free the slaves when he becomes king. Kishward opens his mouth in unbelief and lets Arslan know that he might face tribulations from the lords of the Senate, as they may not fully support his decision to free the slaves. Arslan smiles and tells Kishward that he plans on saving his insolent dad, so he can talk to him about that plan. The following day, Arslan and the lords of Peshawar meet to discuss raising an army there in the fortress. After hearing all he has to say, Bahman forbids Arslan from raising an army there. This comes as a shock to Daryun and Narcissus, and the duo tease him to anger. Bahman reacts accordingly and leaves the room. Narcissus smiles and tells Daryun that Bahman only pretended to be angry so he could leave the room. Before the meeting ends, however, Kishward tells the lot that Bahman reacted that way because of a message he received from Variz before he died. Arslan and the others keep wondering what the message could contain for Bahman to be so sullen about it. After the meeting, Arslan takes a break to relax on one of the balconies of the tall wall. He takes his time to reflect on the many things that have happened in this short time. While he's at it, Hilmaz catches up to him and attacks him. Arslan tries to reason with him, but Hilmaz is way too excited to see Arslan delivered to him on a silver platter. He takes out his sword and prepares himself to fight Arslan. Arslan takes out his short sword to defend himself, but Hilmaz's expertise far outweighed his lack of experience. It doesn't take long for Arslan to lose his sword to be vulnerable to Hilmaz. Just as Hilmaz is about to stab him, Arslan carries a torch and flashes it at Hilmaz's face. Hilmaz, who seemed to be pyrophobic, reacted violently and cowered up due to the fire. While he's distracted, Farangus and the others show up to keep him away from Arslan. After fighting him for a little while, Arslan demands he reveal his name. Hilmaz reveals his identity as the true king of Pars and goes in to take Arslan out. This time, Bahman stands in the way and takes the hit for Arslan. Hilmaz gets very sullen for taking down someone he respects a lot, but since he didn't have enough time to mourn, he takes his leave. Daryun and the others follow him, but Bahman tells them to let him be so they don't end the royal bloodline to the throne of Pars. Just then, it dawns on the lot that Arslan may not have been Andragoras' son. Tehemene has been a bad woman. In his final moments of life, Bahman begs Arslan to become a fine king, despite being a child of wedlock. Before they have time to mourn Bahman's death, a soldier rushes in to report an invasion of the Cinduran army of 30,000 soldiers, led by the second prince of Cindura. Moments after receiving the news, Daryun and Arslan call for an emergency meeting with the other generals of the fortress. At the meeting, Arslan gets too deep in his thoughts as he recalls his final moments with Bahman. After he gets back to his senses, Arslan makes an announcement to the other generals of the fortress, telling them to brace themselves to defend their fortress against the oncoming Cindurans. Meanwhile, the second prince of the kingdom of Cindura, Rajendra, aka the Born Pretender, takes his soldiers through the snowy forest to lay siege to the Peshawar fortress. One of his generals rides up close to him and advises him to refrain from attacking the fortress on the cold winter night. Rajendra counters and tells him that now is their golden opportunity to attack Pars, since the kingdom is currently in disarray. Also, he would love to get easy points against his brother, Gadhevi, the first prince of Cindura, and prove his worthiness to the throne. The general stops talking and continues riding with Rajendra. In the meantime, Arslan and the others wait for the soldiers to get ready for the battle. When they're ready, Narcissus and Daryun meet up with Arslan to ask for his permission to go to battle. Arslan gets worried and tells them to let him go with them to fight. However, Narcissus and Daryun advise him against rushing into battle anyhow. Arslan goes with their reasoning and stays back. On their way downstairs, Narcissus and Daryun discuss the prince's recent behavior. They fear he may have strayed off the righteous path, but Narcissus convinces himself and Daryun otherwise. Just outside the Peshawar fortress, Hilmaz and his earth sorcerer quit spying on Arslan and took their leave to the royal capital. Narcissus and Daryun lead the fortress's army of 10,000 soldiers to the battlefield to meet and fight the Cindurans. On their way there, Daryun gets worried about their enemy numbers being too large for them. However, Narcissus tells him to keep calm and let his strategy come to work. He plans to use the 3 principles of war against the Cindurans. Now, the 3 principles of war, which included Heaven's Time, which covers the best time for war, terrain's advantage, which was the geography of the location to be used in fighting the war, and also the people's harmony, aka the state of mind of the enemy soldiers during the war, are the 3 most fundamental principles upon which any war must be fought. The Cindurans understood none of those concepts explained, and Narcissus plans to use their ignorance against them. Firstly, they would attack the Cindurans in the dead of night, when they're most likely to be tired, so they can catch them by surprise. Secondly, they would use the weather and the terrain of the land of Pars, which the Cindurans knew nothing about, to disrupt the rhythm and order in the Cinduran army. Lastly, they would manipulate the first prince of Cindura, Gadhevi, to attack his brother's army to give him a chance to take him down before it's too late. That night, Narcissus and the Peshawar soldiers launch their attack on the Cindurans. As expected, things play out according to the master tactician, Narcissus's plans. Rajendra is none the wiser as he blindly leads his army to fight the Parshans. Initially, the Cindurans overwhelm the Parshans. However, when fatigue from the snow comes in, they begin to slow down. To make matters worse, Gadhevi and his army arrive to attack Rajendra and his forces from behind. Narcissus sees this and waits for the right time to strike. When it comes, he pounces on the Cindurans, who were already trapped on a frozen lake. The Cindurans are forced to stop the battle for a little while to save themselves. Narcissus, Daryun, and Alfarid single out Rajendra and capture him. The next morning, Rajendra is tied up and made to face Arslan and his subordinates in their tent. Though he expects Arslan to cut him up to pieces, Rajendra faces the shock of his life when Arslan actually cuts him loose and prepares a banquet for him to feast at. That evening, Rajendra eats and drinks with the Parshans like their brother. After eating his fill, Arslan gets close to Rajendra and asks to discuss something with him. Before that, Rajendra challenges Jeev and Ferengis to a drinking contest with him and they both oblige. Right outside the fortress, Elam and Alfarid get into another argument over taking care of Narcissus again. After drinking their hearts out, Jeev and Rajendra get really drunk and faint. Just then, Arslan steals Rajendra's attention to have a discussion with him. When Rajendra is sober enough, Arslan asks him to be his ally. In return, he would help Rajendra defeat his brother and ascend the throne of Cindura. Should he refuse their request, they would have no choice but to spread rumors of him committing treason around Cindura and discredit his reputation. Hearing this, Rajendra laughs at their trick and agrees to form an alliance with Prince Arslan. The following day, Rajendra meets with his new ally to give him a pat on the back. Narcissus and Daryun keep their wits about them, as they know they can't trust that pretender who calls himself Rajendra. Elsewhere, Gadhevi receives a report informing him about his brother's alliance with Pars. This news troubles him, as he starts seeing his brother as a real threat. However, the Grand Vizier of Cindura, Mahendra, tells him to keep calm and wait for the spy he planted in Rajendra's army to do his job and take them down from the inside. After forming the alliance with Rajendra, Arslan and Rajendra's warriors set out to confront Gadhevi and his army. The battle started in the early hours of the day in the winter and lasted all the way till Gadhevi's army was forced to retreat. After they're gone, Rajendra stops by to congratulate and flatter Arslan for winning the battle for him. Narcissus and Daryun, on the other hand, get very suspicious of Rajendra's actions, as they wonder what the cunning man could be planning underneath everything. They just stay and watch the snake yap on and on about his stuff. Not too far behind, the spy that Mahendra had planted, Jaswant, shows up and keeps observing the state of Rajendra and Arslan's army. The new year comes upon Pars in a few days' time. Arslan celebrates the new year by partaking in the pseudo-coronation ceremony hosted by the soldiers to make him officially their lord and king. After the ceremony, everyone gathers around the banquet to eat their hearts out. Jeev flocks around Ferengis as expected, and Alfarid keeps pestering Narcissus and Elam. Arslan, however, takes a break at one point to get some air. There, Rajendra rides to him and requests to discuss something with him. By nightfall, Arslan and his party all have a meeting to discuss Rajendra's strategy. After giving it much thought, Narcissus and the others realize that Rajendra plans to use them as a decoy so he can take down both Gadhevi and Pars at the same time. To counter his plan, Narcissus suggests they let him think they play right into his trap and catch him at the end. He then mentions a few things for them to demand from Rajendra to make things work. Although he doesn't get the full scope of the plan, Arslan goes with it. 2 days later, Jaswant arrives and pledges himself as Arslan's guide to the battlefield. Arslan accepts his services and lets him go his way. Jaswant takes his leaves and goes further into Arslan's camp. There, he finds Jeev, who gives him a soldier's welcome to the camp. After engaging in a little small talk, the man to test his strength, he notices Jaswant's skill and lets him go. Meanwhile, Narcissus and Daryun observe the entire spar between Jeev and Jaswant. They accept the fact that the guy has skill so they can keep their eye on him. A few hours later, Arslan and his army arrive at the fortress Gujarat. Now this fortress belonged to the Cindurans and wouldn't allow them to pass through easily. To make this possible, Narcissus suggests they send an envoy to the fortress to talk to the lord there and cajole him into granting them passage through it. Everyone agrees to this, and Arslan sends Jeev and Jaswant to meet the lord of the fortress, Tara. After getting an audience with the lord, they ask him to let them pass through the fortress, and in return, they would give him some gold and supplies. Tara asks for some time to think about their offer, so they can return the following day. After they're gone, Tara and his entourage sit down to think about the authenticity of the offer. Jaswant interrupts their meeting, introduces himself as Mahendra's man, and tells them that the offer from Jeev is rubbish. He tells them that the temporary was nothing but a distraction to buy the Parshans time to pass through their fortress undetected. Hearing this, Tara and his entourage get very annoyed and think about attacking Pars immediately. However, Jaswant tells them to keep calm and attack the Parshan army from the rear, as that's where their provisions would be kept. Following his explanation, Jaswant leaves the fortress and stays behind to give Tara's soldiers the signal to strike their provision carriage. What he didn't know was that Narcissus already saw through his trick. When the signal came through, the Parshan soldiers showed up and attacked Tara's men with full force. Also, Jaswant, who's still hiding in the trees, is caught and captured by Giv. Tara makes a last-minute attempt to take down Arslan, but Daryun takes him down and sends his men retreating. The following day, Jaswant is made to stand before Arslan, who asks him why he betrayed him in the beginning. Jaswant lets him know he never betrayed anyone, as his loyalty has always been with the only person who cared about him, Mahendra. Arslan thinks long and hard about his punishment and decides to release him. Jaswant is shocked to the bone to see this happen, but Arslan cuts down his ropes and asks him to run free. That night, Elam and Alfarid argue again about who's going to take care of Narcissus. This time, they catch up to Narcissus and ask for his approval. Narcissus tells them he's happy to eat any meal prepared by any of them. When they're gone, Narcissus catches up with Daryun to discuss Arslan's real parents. Although he may not be of royal blood, he's still the best candidate fit for a king at the moment. Gadhevi, after hearing about the downfall of Gujarat, gets very annoyed and throws a fit. He still fails to wrap his head around Arslan's role in the defeat of Gujarat. Mahendra tells him not to worry too much about things, and that they can still use their war elephants to fight the Parshans when it comes down to it. Later that night, Daryun finds Arslan on the balcony of his room and asks him what he's doing there. Arslan tells him he's worried that he's not a child of royal blood. Daryun kneels down and lets him know that whatever happens, he's still going to be the next king of Pars. Back at the fortress of Gujarat, Arslan hears the news about Gadhevi and his war elephants riding towards them for battle. Narcissus and the others, who were near him, thought long and hard of a way to counter the notorious war elephants. Eventually, Narcissus comes up with a strategy to take down Gadhevi's war elephants and his army of 150k. Rajendra, who's clearly in the dark about things, trusts Narcissus's plan and prepares his army for war. Before leaving the fortress, Narcissus and Arslan go over the circumstances again to figure out the best counter to the war elephants. Moments after hearing of Jaswant's failure to protect the fortress of Gujarat, Gadhevi calls him to his tent and unsheathes his sword to behead him. Thankfully, Mahendra was there to beg for mercy on Jaswant's behalf, so he was saved. Before leaving, however, Gadhevi makes it known to Jaswant that if he fails next time, he will be taking his head. Jaswant nods in agreement and thanks Gadhevi and Mahendra for saving him. After he leaves, Mahendra expresses his disappointment in Gadhevi and also complains about Gadhevi's indifference towards his comrades. Back at the fortress, Narcissus and Daryun oversee the construction of new weapons and gear for their army to fight Gadhevi's army. Daryun complains to Narcissus about the disadvantage they're at when facing the war elephants. However, Narcissus reassures him to put his trust in Arslan and watch the magic happen. A few days later, Gadhevi and Rajendra's army gather at the plains of Chandigarh to settle their squabble once and for all. Before the war begins, both siblings exchange some insulting words towards one another. When they're done, the war begins. In the first half of the war, the river between both armies forced them to split up. When Gadhevi gets news of this, he sends his war elephants to fight with the rest of Rajendra's army. Rajendra's soldiers try firing normal arrows at the elephant. Unfortunately, the elephant's hide is too thick for the arrows to penetrate. This causes Rajendra's archers to lose their usefulness against the archers, as the war elephants trample them to pieces. Rajendra's people are shocked at the elephant's strength. With each passing minute, they lose more men. To make matters worse for them, their reporter tells them that the Parshans are trapped at the fortress, as Gadhevi had already sent a fraction of his army to fight them there. Rajendra is put in between a rock and a hard place. Just when all hope seems to be lost, the Parshans arrive. They immediately take to the battlefield to take down any soldiers that block their path to greatness. Rajendra sights Arslan and rushes over to ask him how they got past Gadhevi's soldiers. Narcissus tells them they used paper soldiers to trick the soldiers into thinking there were soldiers on the fortress's walls. Rajendra laughs at their dirty trick and welcomes them to the battlefield to fight for him. Gadhevi gets tired of the Parshans trampling his soldiers, so he sends his war elephants to take all of them down in one run. Daryun leads his soldiers into a formation as they race towards the elephants. When they get close enough, he turns his back on them and leads them to the trap they set previously. When the Cindurans find out about it, it's already too late. The Parshans uncover the heavy-duty catapults they hid the previous night and unload the spear-sized arrows towards the war elephants. This time, the war elephants collapse to their death after getting hit by such poisonous spears. Gadhevi's war elephant, on its way to the trap, is forced to stop and face the Black Knight, Daryun. Gadhevi gets sick and tired of Daryun ruining his plans, so he instructs his elephants to charge towards Daryun. Daryun gets off his horse and gets on the war elephant to capture Gadhevi. However, Jaswant shows up just in time and saves his lord from certain death. A few hours later, the battle ended with Rajendra and Arslan seizing the victory. On the flip side, Gadhevi shames Jaswant and Mahendra for retreating in such a fight when victory was so close to their fists. Mahendra tries to make him understand that Jaswant was only acting with his best interests at heart, but the insolent Gadhevi ignores Mahendra's pleas. After he's gone, Mahendra tells Jaswant to be proud of himself for saving the prince, no matter how ungrateful he is. At that moment, a servant rushes in to tell them that their king has awoken his slumber. Gadhevi rushes to meet his father, who asks for Rajendra as well. Gadhevi lies and tells him Rajendra is currently out of the capital, and is secretly plotting to kill him. The king knows Gadhevi way too well to believe his lies. So instead of putting Gadhevi on the throne, he decides to put the decision in the hands of the creator. He proposes a duel between the brothers, and whoever wins gets to sit at the throne. The news of the duel travels fast, and Arslan is informed about it. Rajendra quickly sprints into action and begs Daryun to act as his proxy and fight for him in the duel. Arslan, upon hearing this request, is amused by Rajendra's request. After hearing all Rajendra had to say, Daryun refuses to fight as his proxy. However, if Arslan could give him the go-ahead, he just may consider accepting his request. Hearing this, Rajendra turns to Arslan and begs him to let Daryun fight for him. Arslan stutters and eventually asks Daryun to accept the fight. Daryun faces Arslan and agrees to help out in the fight. Later that night, Narcissus teases Daryun about his next mission to win the duel for Rajendra. He then mentions how advantageous winning the fight would be for Rajendra and Arslan's campaign. Back at the Cinduran Palace, Gadhevi is seen raging mad when he finds out about Daryun being chosen as Rajendra's proxy. After giving it much thought, he finally decides to use Bahadur, the raging animal, as his own proxy. He's not letting any Black Knight take over him anytime soon. Mahendra warns him about using such a madman in the fight, but Gadhevi tells him he has no choice. The following day, Arslan and his party arrive at the royal capital of Cindura to witness the duel. The citizens there stare at them as they walk by, but thankfully, there are no sneak attacks from Gadhevi's men. After settling down, everybody gathered around to witness the fight. Rajendra introduces Arslan to his father, King Karakala, and asks him to sit and watch the fight from the VIP spot. Moments later, Daryun is welcomed to the arena. He receives the cheers and admiration of the people, as Jeev and Farangis gossip about Gadhevi as usual. When it's time, Bahadur is brought to the arena. He breaks his chains and roars so loud that everyone in the arena hears his voice. He takes his weapon and prepares himself to fight Daryun. Arslan and his party immediately get scared for Daryun's life, as they fear Bahadur is too big a match for him. It begins a few seconds later, and Bahadur charges at Daryun. He uses his entire strength to fight Daryun, but Daryun uses it against him, and manages to slash Bahadur's left chest. Bahadur laughs at the wound and breaks Daryun's sword with his bigger sword. Then he throws Daryun to another end of the arena and walks slowly towards him. Daryun pretends not to have a second weapon, so he uses the broken sword to fight him. He even manages to injure Bahadur a second time. Still, Bahadur still stands. By this time, Gadhevi was already gloating over Rajendra for his victory. Arslan rushes over to Rajendra and blames him for lying to them and putting Daryun in danger. Karakala calms him down and tells him to put more faith in Daryun a little. He's called the Black Knight for a reason. Gadhevi still tries to gloat to his father, but Karakala only sighs and expresses his disappointment in Gadhevi. The fight continues, and Narcissus can already see Daryun's plan. When the time is right, Daryun dips his cape into the fire around the arena and burns Bahadur's face with it. Then he holds Bahadur's hand as tight as he can, takes out his hidden knife, and sinks it into Bahadur's neck. Bahadur dies instantly and sends a shock to everyone's face. Karakala gets up and announces Rajendra the winner of the duel. Arslan faints a little bit and is helped back up. Gadhevi, upon realizing that he's lost, rebels against his father and orders his soldiers to fight and take down his brother, Rajendra. Narcissus and his people sneak out of the arena to escape the fight. However, Gadhevi's soldiers catch up to them and fight them in the corridor. Farangis, Giev, Ilam, and Narcissus neglect Arslan to keep the soldiers at bay. Just then, one of Gadhevi's soldiers ran towards Arslan to take him down. Thankfully, Jaswant joins in and takes down the soldier before taking Arslan to safety. Meanwhile, Mahendra tries to speak some sense into Gadhevi's head. They've lost, and the faster he learns to accept things, the better. Gadhevi, after hearing this from Mahendra's mouth, strikes Mahendra with his sword and lands a fatal wound on him. His own men see this and pause the fight for a little while. Daryun shouts out to the soldiers and orders them to stop fighting, or else he will face them in another duel. The soldiers are shocked at Daryun's display of strength, and they name him their Sher Shernani for that day. Gadhevi loses both the fight and his soldiers that same day due to his insolence. Rajendra, the new king of Cindura, orders his soldiers to take Gadhevi away. After he's taken away, Jaswant rushes over to his master to hear his last words. Mahendra thanks him for always being a good son to him. He also makes him promise him not to take the wrong path in life, as that could lead him to destinies like the one he was cursed with. Jaswant's cries could be heard all over the kingdom, as the only one who gave a damn about him drew his last breath. By February 321 AD, Rajendra wins the duel and is named interim king of Cindura. As his father nears his end, Rajendra stays near him to keep him company. At one point, Karakala begs Rajendra to forgive his elder brother, Gadhevi, for trying to take his life. Rajendra tells his father that he has no intention of punishing his elder brother for his actions. Karakala smiles and thanks Rajendra for being the stronger one. He takes his last breath and passes on peacefully on his royal bed. Hours later, thousands of commoners from Cindura gather around the palace in their funeral attire to mourn the passing of the king. Rajendra is seen crying near his father's coffin. Narcissus, Daryun, Arslan, and the others all spectate his performance and are in awe of how well Rajendra could even fool himself into thinking he actually cared for his father. Anyways, after the ceremony, Gadhevi is released and freed of his charges. He finds Arslan waiting for him in front of the prison cell and thanks him for finding him a way out of the cell. Arslan tells him it's no issue and takes his leave. He finds Jaswant on the way and asks him to walk with him. On their walk, he tells Jaswant that he has reason to believe his father and mother aren't his real parents. Despite that, Narcissus and Daryun still believe him to be the best king for Pars. He then humbly asks Jaswant to join his charade so they can fight together. However, before Jaswant could give a reply, Rajendra showed up to talk to Arslan. After getting his attention, he informs Arslan of the banquet he's hosting in Gadhevi's honor. At the banquet, Narcissus and the others wonder what Rajendra could have planned in mind for this. They all suspect that Rajendra may want his elder brother to get drunk from the wine so that he doesn't feel a thing when the time comes to finish him off. Gadhevi seems to be very disturbed and troubled about what's happening. When his brother nears him, he kneels down and grovels at his feet, asking for forgiveness and a chance to serve him and make it up to him. At that moment, Arslan arrives at the banquet to enjoy himself. Gadhevi sees him and decides to take him down for thwarting his plans to retake the kingdom from Rajendra. He takes a shard of glass from a broken vase and rushes towards Arslan to take him down. Thankfully, Azrael the bird was there to stop him. Rajendra catches up to him and orders his executor to take him down before he becomes a hindrance to their success. The executor takes his axe and beheads Gadhevi. The following day, Rajendra finds Arslan thinking on the balcony of his room. He expresses his gratitude for helping him become king and gets right down to the reason why he was there. Rajendra asks Arslan some tricky questions and tries to get Arslan to spill out Narcissus' strategy to take down Lusitania. Thankfully, even Arslan didn't know about any of Narcissus' strategies to take down the Lusitanians. Rajendra gets a little disappointed, but he keeps his composure and tells Arslan to ask for anything and he will grant it to him. Arslan asks him for about 500 men to help accompany him through his campaign. Rajendra grants him the 1,000 instead. When his generals hear about this, they ask him what his true intentions are. Rajendra settles down and tells them he plans on backstabbing Arslan just so he can teach the little prince how tedious it is to become king. Jaswant, who was eavesdropping on Rajendra's conversation, takes note and sneaks back to Arslan's party. In the next scene, Arslan and his people ride back to Ecbatana. On their way there, Daryun and Narcissus are concerned about how composed Rajendra's party is. Suspect something must be going on, so they keep their eyes peeled for any dirty little tricks Rajendra could play. By nightfall, Rajendra's soldiers wait for the Parshans to sleep. When the time is right, they sneak out of their own tents and ambush the entire camp to attack the Parshans. Rajendra, who was nearby, sees the signal and orders his men to attack. However, when they get to the camp, he finds out he's been tricked. Narcissus and Daryun had already seen through their plan and were lying in wait for him to fall into his own trap. Realizing that he's been made, Rajendra tries to escape the fight in all the hubbub. However, Jeev and Farangius catch up to him and stop him from getting any further. Arslan gives him a look of disappointment for trying to backstab him twice. Rajendra still tries to take down Arslan by throwing his hidden knife. Thankfully, Jaswant was there to stop the knife from hitting. Rajendra's captured again and made to face his soldiers in disgrace. Rajendra shows no remorse as he keeps smiling and asking for his punishment this time. Instead of taking him out, Narcissus lays two options for him. One, he either tags along with them and leaves his kingdom leaderless for 2 years, or he signs a ceasefire agreement and refrain from attacking Pars for 3 years. Obviously, Rajendra chooses the treaty and runs back home with his tail between his legs. After seeing him off, Daryun meets with Arslan again. This time, Arslan tells him that he still can't bring himself to hate Rajendra, despite his several attempts to sabotage his princeship. Everyone makes him know that he's not to blame for that. Arslan is very grateful to have such wonderful people around him. After all the praises, Jaswant shows up and finally pledges his loyalty to Arslan's cause. After he was forced to leave Lusitania with his so-called Holy Templar Knights, Bodin the Yaldabouth Archbishop sought refuge in the fortress of Zabul. Bodin and his men spent a few weeks there and secretly planned a coup to overtake the fortress and use it as their stronghold to threaten Guiscard and his brother, Innocentus. A few weeks pass by and his coup is successful. One day, Guiscard gets the news of Bodin's treachery and his demands. They've been having trouble communicating with their homeland in Lusitania, as Bodin and his army were always there to intercept their messenger birds. Guiscard frowns at Bodin's irritating way of taking his revenge and forcing his thoughts on the Lusitanians. In a balcony meeting with Hilmes, aka Silver Mask Guy, Guiscard complains about the horrible demands Bodin made. According to their sources, Bodin wants Innocentus to execute Tahamane and Andragoras. Once that is finished, Innocentus is to make a public announcement to the people to confess his sins to their creator and ask the people for forgiveness. Hearing the terrible demands, Guiscard and Silver Mask think of what to do. They initially planned on just marching to the fortress of Zabul and taking it down, along with Bodin and the others, but then again the fortress is 30,000 soldiers strong. Silver Mask tells Guiscard to leave things in his hands to take care of. Guiscard thanks him for his service and ends the meeting. In the next scene, Silver Mask hails Sam to his office to discuss taking down Bodine and his band of merry soldiers. While Silver Mask suggests they take a more diplomatic approach, Sam suggests they take the fight to the 30k soldiers and take them down once and for all. It won't only help Guiscard, but also make them look more credible to the people. Silver Mask thanks him for his reasoning and dismisses him. Sam leaves Silver Mask's office and heads down to the dungeons to see Andragoras. On his way there, he recalls the key moments of his life during the war between Lusitania and Pars. Lastly, he remembers the words Hilmis told him the day he woke up from his coma. Seconds later, Sam arrives at the underground dungeon and bribes the officer there to grant him a little time with Andragoras. When he gets his time, he asks Andragoras for the truth. Did he truly assassinate Osroes, his elder brother, and also try to burn his son Hilmis to death? Hearing this, Andragoras laughs and tells Sam he's not worthy to hear the full story yet. Sam peers into Andragoras' dead eyes and leaves the dungeon. In the meantime, Hilmis goes to Guiscard and asks him to allow him to assemble an army filled with Parsians to take down Zabul. Guiscard grants him permission to do so, and he leaves. Hilmis joins Sam in the corridor and discusses his plan of revenge against Andragoras and his son, Arslan. They assemble their army and leave Ecbatana. Guiscard and his men are surprised at the 30k Parsian men he was able to amass in such a short time. He stays and waits for how many of them will return home. Firstly, Sam stops by a small village to ask two travelers about a man they call the One-Eyed Giant who loves women and wine. Sam suspects it's Kubard, one of the cavalry commanders of the Parsian army back then. He gets to the cave and finds out his suspicions are true. The two warriors reunite in good faith and just about their time jump apart. Kubard is grateful for being able to live his life in disgrace peacefully. As long as there's women and wine, he's good. Sam talks and convinces him to join Hilmis' charade to take down Zabul. The duo leave and arrive at Zabul in a few hours' time. Now Zabul's fortress is one of a kind, as it was built on top of a craggy mountain. So to annoy Bodin and his men, Hilmis burns a holy flag. Bodin takes the bait like a fool and sends his army to take down the perpetrators. Hilmis and his people allow the enemy to get close enough before they attack. When the time is right, they send arrows to them and charge. The battle lasts for a few hours, with the Parsians winning Bodin with their infallible strategy. After several hours of fighting, Hilmis and his men take home the win. They return to their camp where they discuss taking down the fortress. At a point in their discussion, Kubard gets very curious and begins asking Hilmis for his plans for the kingdom when he becomes king. Hilmis gives him the generic answer, and this disappoints him. After he's gone, Kubard tells Sam he can't stay any longer, as he suspects Hilmis and Arslan would fight over the throne even after reclaiming Pars from Lusitania, prays for his friend's good fortune, and hops on his horse to keep moving. Back at Peshawar Fortress, Arslan formally issued a decree to take down Lusitania and abolish slavery right after the war was fought. After issuing the decree, all that's left is for him to wait for the generals from far and wide to join his cause. By April of the year 321 AD, the war generals and lords from the kingdom rallied around Peshawar to swear their loyalty to Arslan's cause. Ferengis expresses her surprise at how many generals believed in Arslan's cause. Narcissus and Daryun, on the other hand, are worried about another fight brewing up, as they suspect the generals may not fully support Arslan's decision to abolish slavery. Narcissus tells Daryun to ignore the matter for now, as they have more pressing things to worry about, like the growing unrest between the soldiers. That same night, Jaswant, who's now been promoted to being Arslan's personal bodyguard, gets harassed at his post by one of the Parsian generals, Lord Zaravant. Things nearly get out of hand for both of them, but thankfully one of the generals, Lucian, shows up to stop their fight. A few moments after the fight, Arslan rushes over to Narcissus and Daryun to confirm if it is true. When asked what to do, Narcissus advises Arslan to strip him of his role as satyr up and make Lucian take up the post. This should make the soldiers believe more in Arslan's rule and ease the dissension between them. Arslan is forced to make such a hard decision, but he does so in good faith. The following day, Narcissus, Daryun, Arslan, Ferengis, and a few other war generals all gather around for a meeting to discuss Hilmis and his campaign. At the meeting, Narcissus lays out the horrible things Hilmis has done in the past and lets the people know that Hilmis's campaign must be brought down by any means necessary. Everyone agrees to this and waits to hear Arslan's thoughts. Arslan shocks everybody by justifying Hilmis's need for revenge. Narcissus tells him that although this is true, Arslan should still make his resolve to defeat Hilmis and become king of Pars. Arslan thinks a little about this and tells his men to give him time to get his affairs in order so he can come to a solid resolution. After the meeting, Narcissus and Daryun find Jeev chilling on a balcony in the corridor. Jeev calls their attention and tells them a little about Andragoras' rule and terrible crimes. Arslan, on the other hand, keeps thinking about his life on another balcony. Hilmis and his army eventually break into the Zabul fortress. After killing off the soldiers there, they find out that Bodin had already abandoned his soldiers and fled the fortress. The entire battle ends in a victory for Hilmis and his army. That night, Etoile finds his men saying derogatory things about him. Rather than get angry at them, he ignores them and takes on their post on his own. Afterwards, Etoile walks to the riverside and recalls his precious moments with his lord. Apparently out of his care for him, his lord Barcassian didn't want him to risk his life in battle. Etoile had to rebel against him and fight for his pride and family. After realizing his resolve, he changes his clothes and removes his helmet to reveal his long blonde hair, which makes him look like a woman. Then he sneaks into the Partian camp and speaks to one of the merchants there about some of his merchandise. That night, Etoile finds his way into Peshawar fortress as a girl. He pretends to pour wine for some of the soldiers there, and gets very careful and attentive to listen to anything they all have to say. After getting dead drunk, the soldiers all rise up to cheer their victory over Lusitania. Etoile sneaks back outside and throws a fit about the disrespect the Partians are making towards the Lusitanians. Alfarid finds him there and discusses a little about him. She tells Etoile about Narcissus and calls him the most beautiful being ever. When they're done talking, Alfarid leaves. One of the drunk soldiers from earlier comes by and tries to force himself on Etoile. Etoile throws him down and slams him on the floor. At that moment, Arslan, who was walking outside to get some air, sights Etoile perambulating. He walks forward and fails to recognize his old friend, seeing as he looks like a girl completely. After exchanging pleasantries, he helps the lady dispose of the drunken soldier's body and then takes her somewhere else to help her escape the fortress. Arslan runs a few meters and stops to take a breather. While resting, he begins to get into his feelings with Etoile. Etoile asks him why he's going to war with the Lusitanians. Arslan tells him it's because of the friend he met 4 years ago. After passing through so much in such a short time, Arslan feels like he owes it to the people to be there for them when they need him the most. Mind you, Etoile still didn't know that the boy in front of him was Prince Arslan. He just tells the white-haired boy not to beat himself up too much about things that don't concern him. The weight of the people is that of the king to worry about, and not a spoiled and pampered brat like Arslan. Arslan smiles and concurs with Etoile's thoughts. Then he takes Etoile back to a merchant's carriage and hides him there till they come by and take him outside. Before letting him leave, Etoile warns him not to lose his life in the war, as it would be the worst thing to happen ever. Arslan nods and rushes back to the country. The following day, Arslan makes his resolve and promises his subjects to fight and become king of Pars, not because he covets the throne, but because he wants to be there for his people as the rightful heir to the throne of Pars. Later that day, Narcissus and Daryun meet to discuss the progress of their preparations ever since he was demoted. Narcissus admits to the army being at ease lately, as they all seem to accept Arslan's decision. As they talk and walk, they're interrupted by Lord Zaravant and his 2 fellow generals, and Isfan, as they're seen harassing Jaswant again. This time, Zaravant was being too insulting, but Narcissus and Daryun sat and watched to see the outcome of the confrontation. Eventually, before things got out of hand, Jeev intervened by playing some soothing music from his banjo guitar. After grabbing their attention, he speaks some soothing words to them, hoping it will calm their minds. However, his act of peace only seemed to aggravate Zaravant the most. This time, Narcissus steps in to calm his mind. Zaravant was under the notion that Narcissus' strategy of keeping them at the back lines was because he didn't have enough faith in them or something. However, Narcissus reassures him that he's at the back line because of something important. Hearing this, Zaravant and his colleagues back off. Later on, Narcissus and Daryun meet up in the war room to discuss the dissension in the army. While Narcissus suggests a plan, Daryun keeps getting worried. Eventually, the 2 of them come up with a plan good enough for them to quell the growing unrest in the soldiers. In the next scene, Kubard is seen heading towards Peshawar's fortress. Just as he's about to leave, some of Zande's soldiers arrive to take him out. However, Kubard eliminates all of them before continuing his journey to the fortress. By nightfall, while the soldiers at the fortress play and get to know each other, Isfan, who's later revealed to be the late cavalry captain Shapur's brother, finds and confronts Jeev for killing his brother. He asks for an apology from Jeev to relieve his grieving heart. However, Jeev tells him no such thing. Instead, he insults Isfan's origins and provokes him to a fight with him. This angers Isfan so much that he challenges Jeev to a fight. In a matter of minutes, Isfan and Jeev are seen fighting. Ferengis and the others step in to stop the fight. Arslan asks for an explanation and Jeev pouts some insulting words. Daryun beats his head and scolds him for provoking General Isfan to anger. Still, Jeev remains indifferent. When he's had enough, Arslan banishes Jeev away from the fortress to rethink his actions. Everyone in the camp is shocked at how much Arslan favored them. The dissension between them seemed to die at that moment. A few hours later, Arslan calls for Ferengis and the 2 dudes, Daryun and Arslan, to inform them just how sorry he was for sending Jeev on such a demeaning mission. Daryun tells him not to worry, and that he also sent Jeev on a mission to find someone while he's away. The following day, Arslan and his army leave the fortress and march towards the keep of St. Emanuel to fight and defeat Hilmis and the Lusitanians. When they get far enough, they let out a battle cry to let the Lusitanians know they've arrived. At that instant, Guiscard gets word about Arslan's advance towards the kingdom. He asks his generals if Hilmis was back from his campaign in Zabul, but they tell him he's still nowhere to be found. Not to worry though, as Guiscard knows, Hilmis can't pass off a chance to fight and take down Arslan's army. That night, Arslan and all the generals assemble in a tent to discuss their battle strategy before the big day. Narcissus explains their plan to the lot, telling them they'll be passing the keep of Saint Emanuel. However, there's a fortress called Chasum Fortress there that belonged to the enemy. Zaravant, Isfan, and Tus ask Arslan and Narcissus to let them fight the fortress and prove their worth. However, Arslan tells them not to do so as they don't want to lose any men to useless fights. The very next day, the trio and their army pass by the fortress. They ignore the orders from Arslan and let their ego get the best of them, thinking the fortress was just something small they could trample on. Sadly for them, the soldiers there were already waiting for them. When Zaravant and his colleagues get close enough, they unleash their traps and rain heavy fire on them. When news of this gets to Arslan and the others, he immediately organizes a search party to rescue them from the Chasum soldiers. Later that day, Zaravant and some of his people manage to escape certain death. However, Arslan and the others have a hard time pinpointing their exact location. When it seems like all hope is lost, Jeev comes through and plays his banjo guitar to help Arslan and his people find Zaravant and his soldiers. Arslan and his people immediately recognize the signal and follow it to the source. There, they find their people trapped and take down the Chasum soldiers. Zaravant, Isfan, and Tus are all shocked that the crowned prince would care so much as to save their puny souls. Arslan makes it known to them that they aren't leaving anybody behind, and they're just as important to him as Narcissus and Daryun, his two most trusted advisors. Elsewhere, Ferengis, who seems to be catching a fling for Jeev, finds him and chats him up. Jeev plays around a little and whines the woman before taking his leave again. Guiscard gets further information from his scouts about Arslan's army count. According to the rumors, Arslan's army count is at 60k, but they suspect it's only hearsay, and that the actual number of Arslan's army caps at somewhere around 40k. To counter any plans Narcissus may have set in place, Guiscard ordered his men to prepare about 70,000 men to fight Arslan and his army. His generals complain about the number being way too much for them to rally up. However, Hilmas advises them against playing into Narcissus' hands. He makes it known that he still has the 30k men he took with him on the Zabul campaign. So, all he needs is for Guiscard to loan him 70k men to fight Arslan and crush him completely. Guiscard takes a long look at Hilmas and grants his wish. Guiscard tries to ask Hilmas about his plans, but Hilmas asks him to trust him. Later that night, Elam and Alfarid sneak into the royal capital to make some findings about Hilmas' plan. Along the way, they're caught by two royal guards who call their attention to ask for an explanation. Out of the fear of being caught, Alfarid gives the soldiers the impression that she is having a lover's quarrel with Elam, whom she is dating. Thankfully, the soldiers buy this and let them go. After they're gone, Elam and Alfarid get to a pub that has lots of soldiers drinking and partying inside. Inside, one of the Parshan gets drinks for everyone to party for their victory. The Lusitanian soldiers get jealous of the Parshans having a good time. Elam and Alfarid get what they want and head back to the camp. On their way, they argue about Narcissus yet again, but thankfully, they both escape with their guts intact. In the next scene, Hilmas visits Andragoras in his deep underground dungeon to gloat about his impending victory in the war about to happen. Andragoras, however, laughs and scolds him for being no ignorant of the true nature of the royal family of Pars. From the things he said, it seemed like the royal family had been cursed to shed innocent blood at least once in every generation. Hilmas ends up getting annoyed before he leaves. The following day, Hilmas, his generals, and their soldiers all leave the fortress to the battleground to prepare for war. On the other side, Arslan, Narcissus, and the others all gather together to discuss the recent findings from Elam and Alfarid's stakeout. Now that they know Sam is going to be on Hilmas' side, they have to get back to the drawing board and plan against him. The following morning, Daryun trains Arslan on the ways of the blade. As expected, the Black Knight defeats Arslan in the spar, but at least Arslan seems to have been making progress. After their training, Arslan sights a few newbie soldiers and instructs the more experienced ones to teach the newbies the way to fight. Daryun finds Narcissus somewhere and talks to him about their loyalty to Arslan. Narcissus asks Daryun what he would do if Arslan lost the battle. Daryun warns him against wishing bad luck on the prince and lets him know that Arslan will win. By nightfall, Arslan finds Narcissus creating a still life painting. This time, Arslan sits Narcissus down to ask a few questions about the foot soldiers that they had in their army. Narcissus explains to Arslan that the foot soldiers were all slaves once in their lives. Arslan feels sorry for them and promises to make life easier for them after the war against Hilmas. After their discussion, Arslan puts a smile on his face and thanks Narcissus again for always helping him. Narcissus reminds him of the catch. Arslan smiles and tells him he didn't forget it all. Elsewhere, Ferengis and the two kids talk about Jeev and his travels. Ferengis tells them that even though he's far away, it still remains with Arslan all the way. At that moment, Etoile and his small party of soldiers visit the keep of Saint Emanuel to discuss with his lord Count Barcassian. After requesting an audience with him, Etoile complains to the Barcassian for allowing the Parshans to get too close to the fortress. Barcassian reads out a missive from Innocentus himself, talking about the specifics of the war. After hearing all there is to hear, Etoile walks back outside. At that point, Hilmas and his army arrived at the keep to ready themselves for war. At sunrise, Arslan and his people near the edge of the keep of Saint Emanuel. They lay their eyes on the wall of the keep and say their prayers before advancing forward. After progressing a little forward into the keep of Saint Emanuel, Arslan and his people camp to rediscuss their strategy. Arslan complains to his subjects about the huge number of soldiers Hilmas had in his army, but Narcissus tells them they have plans set in place to make things happen. He then mentions to Daryun to get their plans in order. Daryun gets up and takes his leave to do his part. Arslan still finds something to complain about. However, Narcissus tells him not to worry too much and just leave things to his commander's hands. Elsewhere, Hilmes gears up in his armor and walks up to give a speech to his soldiers right before heading to war. At that point, Arslan and his army arrive at the gates to the keep of Saint Emanuel. There, they prepare the battering ram to force their way into the gates. However, the Lusitanian soldiers already saw through their plans. The officials under Arslan are shocked to find Sam helping the Lusitanian soldiers to fight against them. Elam rushes back to their camp and sends word back to Arslan. There, he tells him about Sam joining the enemy army. Arslan acknowledges this fact and tells him not to fret, that they've made plans for him. Elsewhere, Etoile visits Barcacion again to complain to him for not allowing him to join the battle they're about to fight. Barcacion sighs and asks Etoile to keep calm and just let his faith lead him. However, Etoile was sick and tired of being on the sidelines. Barcacion that he'll fight with or without his approval, and then leaves. Up next, Farangus and Alfarid have a little talk about Narcissus and their reasons for helping Arslan. Alfarid tells Farangus that although she's in love with Narcissus, she still helps Arslan because she suspects he'll do something very great in the near future. A few hundred meters away, the battle between Pars and Lusitanian at the keep of Saint Emanuel is taken to the next level when Zande, Carlin's son, leads his own army out of the keep to attack Arslan's army. Daryun, after seeing them coming, orders his men to rush into the fight and take down the Lusitanians with all their might. Suddenly, everyone rides down the hill to clash with Zande and his men. The higher-ups in the Partian army took down as many soldiers as they could. In the meantime, Kishward leads a small army through the aqueducts of the keep. Thinking he's finally gotten a hold of things, Kishward gets the shock of his life as he finds Sam and his people waiting there for them. Sam sends 2 soldiers to bring down Kishward, but then again, Kishward takes them down. Soon, both parties clash with Sam fighting Kishward. Their fight, Kishward asks Sam why he would support such a bad person for the throne of Pars. Sam, however, tells him he's only making sure the royal bloodline of Pars doesn't die out. After hearing what Zande did, Hilmes gets annoyed and cusses at him for being so insolent. Nonetheless, the fight continues with both sides facing heavy casualties. Etoile, at one point in the fight, tries to make the soldiers take the faith of Yaldabaoth. However, they weren't ready to listen to him. Instead, they ganged up against him and threw him off his horse. While on the ground, Etoile finds Elam passing a secret passageway and follows him. Meanwhile, Zande and his men finally muster the courage to charge towards the main base of the Partians. When they got there, they cut open the tents only to find out they were all empty. Just then, several Partians begin firing arrows down at Zande and his men. Narcissus, on the other hand, smiles as things keep going according to plan. Zande retreats after finding out about the trap Arslan laid for him. On his way back to the keep, he finds Daryun there and engages him in a fierce duel to the death. Sam and Kishward also keep fighting until the reinforcements arrive. Also, Daryun pauses his fight with Zande to reason with his woes and thoughts. Zande, however, wasn't ready to reason with Daryun at all. He holds out his spear and charges at Daryun one more time. Daryun dodges his attack and stabs him in the side with his own blade. Just then, the Earth Sorcerer shows up to take Zande's unconscious body away. In the meantime, Arslan and his army get attacked by Etoile and his party. Etoile calls out to Arslan and urges him to come face him. However, he gets the shock of his life when he finds out that the spoiled rich kid he always looked down on was actually the crowned prince of the kingdom of Pars. After finding out the truth about the spoiled rich boy, Etoile still chooses not to believe it. When reality dawns on him, he takes out his sword and charges towards Arslan. Elam got in the way and protected Arslan from Etoile's sword. Narcissus, Alfarid, and Farangus arrive shortly to stop Etoile from doing any more damage. Etoile realizes he's outnumbered, so he rushes outside and escapes on his horse. Alfarid follows up, but before she leaves, Narcissus tells her to follow Etoile secretly and find the hidden passageway they pass through for them to come there without alerting the palace guards. After they're gone, Narcissus returns to Arslan's tent and commends Elam for coming through for the crowned prince. Elam smiles and tells Arslan not to worry too much about him. As he rides back to the village, Etoile's thoughts prevent him from noticing Alfarid behind him. He takes the secret passageway and shows Alfarid the secret way into the fortress. That night, after Daryun returns from his battle, he rushes to Arslan to ask him about the recent attempt on his life. Arslan tells him about his old friend Etoile and tells them he wants to head out to battle the following day and fight on the battleground. That same night, they all march towards the keep and arrive there moments before dawn. Narcissus and his party receive news from Alfarid, informing them that they've found a way into the keep. Before starting the most important battle in his life, Arslan clenches his fist and inspires his soldiers to give this last battle their all. The end of their fighting is near, and this is the fight that determines their fate. As the sun rises, Arslan raises the battle cry, Yasha Suin, and orders his men to go forward and fight. The Lusitanians atop the wall start shooting arrows at the Parsians on the ground. Thinking they have the advantage, the Lusitanians get the shock of their life as Alfarid and her small army sneak into the fortress successfully. They attack the archers atop the wall and open the gates for the Parsians to enter the fortress. Seeing this, Sam and his people try every possible thing they can to prevent the Parsians from entering. Sadly for them, the Parsians weren't there to play either. Arslan, Daryun, and Narcissus lead their party into the fortress grounds and ride towards Hilmas. They run into a few soldiers initially and are trapped by them. However, Kubard shows up and offers his help to them. Arslan thanks Kubard for his help and continues riding towards Hilmas's building. At the entrance, they find Sam and his soldiers waiting there for them. Almost immediately, the two sides clash heavily. Amidst all the fighting, Narcissus gets to fight with Sam, while Daryun and Arslan sneak into the building to find Hilmes. The women of the fortress, after seeing their men die recklessly to the Parsians, begin to pray to their creator, Yaldabaoth. Arslan and Daryun, upon entering the lobby, are showered with arrows from several soldiers. They wait for the soldiers to run out of arrows, but Ferengis walks into the lobby with some plot armor and shoots the soldiers down one by one. Arslan and Daryun find Hilmes and his subordinates waiting for them in his room. Hilmes frowns at Arslan for bringing the Black Knight with him, but Arslan asks to hear what Hilmes has to say. Hilmes rambles on and on about the usual issues he's facing. However, Arslan calms him down and lets him know that he's not the only one who's been hurt before. He has also been hurt, but that doesn't mean he'll back down from doing his due diligence to the people of Pars. Hilmes gets even more annoyed at Arslan's utterances and raises his sword to fight him. Daryun gets in the way and prepares himself to fight the man in front of him. Before falling off the balcony with Hilmes, he takes one last look at Arslan and appreciates him for considering him a subject of his all this while. Arslan turns to Barkatian and discusses a few things for him. Barkatian admits defeat and calls Arslan a kind king for even caring for his enemies. In the meantime, Daryun and Hilmes fight for dear life in the fountains of the yard downstairs. The two drag it out for so long that they eventually risk everything to land a hit. After a final charge at each other, Daryun gets on his knees from the pain of his wounds. However, Hilmes, although wounded, stays up with the help of the Dark Earth sorcerer around him. Daryun collapses as the scene goes black. Moments after the defeat of the Lusitanians in the keep, Etoile struggles to find his way. He suddenly remembers Barkatian and heads towards the tower. Kishward and his men rally themselves to take care of the dead. However, they're stopped in their tracks when something out of the ordinary happens. Suddenly, the women from earlier begin jumping from the clock tower and falling to their deaths. Barkatian does the same in the building he's in. Etoile arrives just in time to see Barkatian fall off the railings, with Arslan holding the knife. Without thinking twice, he rushes towards Arslan and attacks him. Arslan, however, counters his attacks and removes his helmet. Just then, he finds out that Etoile was actually the girl he helped escape from the guards back then. Arslan's stupefied. Before he can think of anything, Etoile attacks and keeps accusing Arslan of killing his count. Arslan tries to tell him the truth, but Etoile keeps on being violent. Eventually, she pins him down and raises her sword to take him down. Thankfully, Ferengis came at the right time to stop Etoile from killing Arslan. After the war, Arslan instructed his soldiers to take care of the remaining Lusitanians in the keep and care for the wounded. Arslan, after being saved, rushes over to find Daryun and sees him all down and wounded. Arslan rushes over to help him up. Thankfully, Daryun could still move. Narcissus, on the other hand, finds the food storage silo and gets inside to assess the keep's food stock. One of the soldiers releases an opening for new dry food to fall out. Surprisingly, Alfarid falls out with the grains and lands on the pile of food below. Narcissus is more than happy to see his little entourage safe and sound. Alfarid blushes over Narcissus' smile and asks him why he's so interested in the food stock of the keep. Narcissus explains a few more random things before leaving the silo. After getting his wounds dressed, Jaswant, Daryun gets back up on his feet. Jaswant asks him why Hilmes left him to live, seeing as he easily could have finished Daryun. Daryun suspects Hilmes is still toying with them, and hasn't shown them his true colors yet. Kishward shows up and teases Daryun about his wounds. Daryun picks up his sword and gets back up to continue his duties. High up on a balcony in the keep, Kubard and Ferengis drink and chat about their most recent victory. Arslan, on the other hand, takes some food to visit Etoile in his cell. On seeing him, Etoile tries to push him away. Arslan, however, calms him down and tells him the truth behind Count Barkatian's killing. This time, Etoile believes him, but then again he begins pouting a few disdainful words about his religion and Pars pagans. He does this while munching on his food voraciously. When he's done eating, he settles down and finally tells Arslan the truth about his gender. So, it turns out the manly Etoile is actually a girl. She was born into a family of knights and had a hard time fitting into an army. So when she was younger, she decided to become a knight and fight her way up the ranks so she could become respected. Moving on, Etoile mentions that her real name is Estelle, and she's always heard rumors about Arslan having 2 horns on his head. The Arslan she sees now is very different from the Arslan she's used to imagining. When she's done talking, Arslan speaks his mind. He tells Etoile to point blank that her people from Lusitania have been abusing their religion through countless murders and massacres. Etoile loses her shit and begins shouting at Arslan, telling him to leave her be. Arslan apologizes for annoying her and then takes his leave. Before leaving, Arslan leaves the door to the prison open and asks Etoile to offer prayers for her dead Lusitanian soldiers the following day. The very next day, Ferengis sings an elegy for the dead Lusitanian soldiers. When she's done, Arslan calls Etoile to come and say her prayers for the dead. Etoile holds her holy book and prays for the souls of the dead Lusitanians. Back at the royal capital of Ecbatana, Guiscard loses his cool after hearing just how easily the keep fell to the hands of Arslan and the others. He cusses at Hilmes for doing so little to keep Arslan and his men at bay. Speaking of the devil, Hilmes arrives just in time and reveals his true identity to Guiscard. He is Hilmes, son of Osroes and rightful heir to the throne of Pars. He's there to make a deal with Guiscard. If Guiscard helped him ascend the throne of Pars, he would help make him king of Lusitania. Guiscard likes the deal, so he accepts it. In the meantime, Narcissus and his people set fire to the keep of Saint Emanuel. Arslan and the others leave the keep with some of the Lusitanian survivors after watching it burn to the ground. On their way to the royal capital, Etoile tries to forcefully tie a bandage to help one of the soldiers there. However, she fails to do the right thing and ends up injuring him more. Thankfully, Elam was there to help. By evening time, after camping, Etoile rushes to fetch some water to care for a pregnant woman. She finds Ferengis there, and they both discuss Arslan. Etoile asks Ferengis why she and all of Arslan's subjects revere him so much. Ferengis smiles and tells her it's only because Arslan keeps trying to be the best for everyone. By nightfall, Arslan finds Etoile feeding the children. He startles and interrupts her for a second, forcing her to pull his ear to one side to scold him. The following morning, the pregnant lady from earlier finally gives birth to a bouncing baby boy. Etoile gets very emotional as she holds the little child in her hands. Before long, Arslan and his people leave their camp and continue their journey to the royal capital. Arslan admits to this journey being one of the longest and most important in their campaign. Narcissus and Daryun join him to laugh and be merry as they go back to reclaim their land. Jeev, on the other hand, is seen on his own pilgrimage wondering what will come of this war. Over the course of a few weeks, Arslan and his party had to abandon their campaign to reclaim Pars from Guiscard and his brother. This is because the kingdom of Turan, after realizing Arslan's absence, invaded the Peshawar fortress. So to prevent his base of operations being left in the hands of the enemy, Arslan returned to Peshawar to defend it from the Turanians. Hilmes, on the other hand, diverted a little from his primary objective. Instead of fighting Arslan to become king of Pars, he now seeks peace in his troubled mind. One night, Hilmes pays his sorcerer a visit to discuss something important. After hearing all he had to say, the sorcerer scolds him for revealing his true self to Guiscard. Hilmes sees no shame in what he did, as long as he is able to make the deal with Guiscard. The sorcerer moves on in the discussion and tells Hilmes about the sword of the legendary hero, Kaikusra. Ruknabad, which is the sword of the hero, holds legendary powers and would be a good artifact for any king to have. Hilmes opens his eyes wide in surprise as he thinks the sword is gone. He then throws a fit and asks for the location of the sword. The sorcerer tells him if he's truly a descendant of the hero, then he will be able to wield it. In the next scene, Arslan and his party finally return to Peshawar Fortress. They find the Turanians trying to force their way into the fortress and quickly get into an attack formation. They sound the battle cry and attack the Turanians from behind. The war between Turan and Arslan's army lasted for hours on end. The soldiers from the fortress are more than happy to see their crowned prince again. Narcissus has Ferengis and the other army members surround and trap the Turanians, so they have a hard time fighting them. During the fight, Kubard almost gets taken out. Thankfully, Yaswant was there to save him. After losing several thousand of his men, the Turanian commander retreats with the remaining ones. After the fight, Arslan returns to his seat and calls for a meeting with Lucian, the interim lord of the fortress. Amidst their discussion, they wonder what Rajendra was doing when they called him for help. Arslan concludes that Rajendra must have refused to help them in hopes that the two armies lose most of their men. Nonetheless, Arslan is just grateful he and his men are okay. That night, Daryun catches Narcissus thinking deeply on a balcony. He asks about it, and Narcissus tells him he's worried about what's going on in Ecbatana, seeing as they never made any move to follow them even after they pulled back. Whatever's going on, though, he knows it's something out of the ordinary. Meanwhile, Elam arrives at Arslan's chamber to help arrange his stuff. While at it, Arslan admits to being very tired and stressed out from the whole charade. He wishes Jeev was there so he would soothe his mind with a nice song. At that same moment, Jeev is seen resting and complaining of his loneliness in a forest. While talking about his woes, he sees Hilmes and his army riding towards Kaikusra's tomb to plunder it for the legendary sword. On getting there, Hilmis has his men open the entrance to the tomb before gracing it with his presence. Zande was also there with him. Together, all 5 or so of them get to the grave of the hero. They open it and pay their respects before taking the sword of Ruknabad. Just as they're about to leave with it, Giv shows up to steal the sword. He challenges Hilmis to a fight, and eventually manages to steal the sword right under his nose. According to Giv, Arslan is the only one meant to hold such an artifact. Zande gets very pissed and follows Giv as he makes his way out of the tomb. However, just as he's about to escape with the sword, the Temple Knights, serving under Bodin, show up and steal Ruknabad from both Giv and Hilmis. Giv is satisfied as long as the artifact isn't in Hilmis' hands, so he heaves a deep sigh and returns to his hideout. In the meantime, Guiscard and 2 other guards visit Andragoras' underground prison. There, they find him in chains and ask him to tell them about Hilmis and the history behind both of them. Instead of revealing the truth to them, Andragoras laughs and breaks his chains. Guiscard gets very surprised and asks him where he found such strength. Andragoras tells him he's been pouring sweat and soup on the same spot for years. He was able to break them because of the rust. At that point, Etoile, now disguised as a dude, arrives at Ecbatana with a bunch of refugees. He recalls the final moments he had with Arslan and walks into the royal capital. Inside, he finds the entire streets of the capital in shambles, as Andragoras reclaims his rightful place on the throne. After fighting and taking down Guiscard, Andragoras gets back to his throne and asks for a meeting with his wife, Tehemene. Tehemene, upon reaching the hall, breaks character and begs Andragoras to return her child to her, as she misses him dearly. Andragoras leaves his throne, captures Guiscard, and heads out of Ecbatana. On his way to his next destination, he's chased and attacked by the Lusitanian Knights. Andragoras releases Guiscard to his soldiers and continues on alone, to find an army large enough for him to return the fight to them. After returning to their king, the Turanians get the scolding of their lifetime as the king bashes them for being so weak against the Parsians. On the other hand, they do plan to launch another attack on the fortress. Only this time, they will be going in full force. As they laugh over their impending victory, Jizma, one of the generals captured by the Parsians earlier, returns to the camp and presents his report to the king and his subordinates. According to what he heard, the Parsians are planning to rally up with about 10k or more soldiers from the south to enlarge their army. The king of Turan laughs and tells his men to prepare the soldiers to lay siege on the fortress that night. He plans to attack and capture Peshawar before they rally up with their allies. That night, Arslan and his people realize what's about to happen. They brace themselves for war and await the king of Turan, Tokyomesh, to make his presence known. When the time comes, the king of Turan makes an announcement to the fortress and makes his goals to pillage the fortress known. Just when they thought things were going according to plan, Elam rushed in to tell Arslan about the king's assassination plan. Apparently, the king captured a few people from the neighboring villages and was about to execute them right in front of the fortress to force Arslan to show his face. Well, this works as Arslan gets seriously emotional after seeing his own people get slaughtered by the king of Turan. He rushes out of his room and gets to the wall of the fortress. Then he calls out the name of the king of Turan and declares war on the king of Turan. After his speech, Arslan gets together with Daryun and his men. When all is ready, he opens the gate and sounds the battle cry for the war to begin. In a nearby bush, Jizma and his men lie and wait for the signal from their king to attack. Almost immediately after Arslan and his people leave the fortress gates, Jimsa is informed about their movement. He then sights an army advancing silently towards the battleground, and without confirming whether they were under Arslan or not, attacks them. In the meantime, Daryun wholeheartedly fights the Turanians and takes down each and every one of them. Arslan separates himself from the crowd and rides with Jaswant to the king of Turan to fight him. Amidst their fight, some other knights join to help their king. Thankfully, Jeev and Ferengis were there to take all of them down. Soon, the king of Turan pins Arslan down. Just as he's about to take him down, Jeev shoots an arrow at the Turanian king and takes down his horse. Everyone is so happy to see the scoundrel Jeev again. Moments later, the hubbub dies down, and the king of Turan faces Jeev. He orders his men to take him down, but Daryun and his men arrive to support them. The king of Turan smirks and tells Narcissus to wait for his reinforcements. Narcissus smiles and tells the king that he's already got that taken care of. Just then, it's revealed that Jimsa and his men were actually fighting their own soldiers under the darkness. Realizing that he's been made, the king of Turan refuses to back down. Instead, he orders his men to keep fighting till their last breath. The battle rages on until one of the lords, Lord Tarkan of Turan, challenges Daryun. After fighting Daryun to an extent, Daryun takes him down. Reality dawns on the king of Turan, and he retreats immediately. Victory cries from the Parsian army could be heard in all the lands. Jimsa, on the other hand, bows his head in defeat, as he realizes he's been used from the very beginning. After the war with the Turanians, Arslan gets to hear what Jeev has to say. Jeev tells him about the legendary sword from Ruknabad. Then he turns his attention to Ferengis and accuses Kubard of stealing his woman. Narcissus and Daryun wonder what could have made Hilmis fancy such a legendary sword. Back at the Turanian base camp, one of the generals there, Idarish kills the king right in front of the other soldiers as punishment for retreating and makes himself king. After the hearing, Arslan calls for Tus and rewards him for being an integral part of Narcissus' plan. Tus humbly accepts his honor and thanks Arslan for helping him out. Just then, a soldier rushes into the hall to announce the arrival of King Andragoras. Arslan and the others are shocked at this revelation, but they have no choice. Andragoras arrives at the fortress of Peshawar, assumes his role as lord of his fortress, and calls for an emergency meeting. Daryun tries to speak some sense into the king's head, but Andragoras already has his mind set on something different. He orders Arslan to leave the fortress for a faraway land to help him amass 50,000 soldiers to help his army grow and reclaim his kingdom from the Lusitanians. After getting his sword stolen by the Temple Knights, Hilmes and his people pursued the knights in hopes of getting the sword back. Along the line, he runs into a very old friend, the Princess of Mariam, an ally of Pars who goes by the name Irina. Scouting the land from a hill, he notices some bandits from the Zot clan attacking Irina's party. Before things get way out of hand, Hilmes and Xanda come down the hill and chase them away. When they're gone, Hilmes faces Irina to hear what she has to say. Irina tells him she's currently searching for Prince Hilmes of Pars, so Irina has a condition that makes her unable to see. At first, she doesn't suspect that Hilmes is the one standing in front of her. However, when she hears his voice, she immediately confirms that it's him. Before she gets to talk to him, though, denies being the Prince of Pars. He gives her an insignia and advises her to head towards Zabul for protection. He leaves her in her carriage and continues his search. On their way to their next destination, Xanda stops and asks Hilmes if he is in the right to ignore Mariam like that. Hilmes tells him to mind his business and avoid butting in. Xanda obliges and continues riding with his master. At that point, Hilmes recalls his life after that incident with his uncle, Andragoras. A few days after getting burned on the face by the fire set by his uncle, a younger Hilmes wakes up in a small house. Back then, he was still so confused about what happened to him. He finds the person who saved him and asks for his identity. The person, who looked very much like the Earth Sorcerer, refuses to tell him his name. Instead, he refers to himself as an entity who thrives in chaos. He was only helping Hilmes heal because of the chaos he would cause when he began to get revenge for his father's death. Hilmes goes to sleep a little while later and is transported to Mariam. As a young man with a thirst for revenge, Hilmes trained day and night back then to get strong enough to avenge his father's death. Even the lord of the locale he was staying at in Mariam had to beg him to stop training so hard, just so people wouldn't begin to suspect his true identity. Hilmes succumbs to his master and heads out to a serene place to train. There he finds the blind Irina in a flower plantation checking out some flowers. He settles down with her and shows her a flower he calls Zaria. He describes all he could about the flowers to her and makes her smile a little. Irina asks after his name, and when he tells her, she tries to touch his face. By that time, the wound was still a little painful to him. Before they could talk, her caretaker came through to take her back to the mansion. Since then, Hilmes would sneak outside to meet Irina and spend some time alone with her. Naturally, this caused her to develop feelings for him. After discussing this at length about their goals, Hilmes finally reveals his true identity to Irina. However, he promises to return one day when he's king of Pars and get her back. That night, the sorcerer returned to Hilmes' room. This time, he wakes him up to inform him that the time is right for him to begin his journey for revenge. He gives Hilmes an update on the happenings around Pars and leaves. Just then, the lord of the building arrives with his guards to abduct Hilmes and surrender him to Lusitania, who was attacking them at the time. Hilmes refuses to be captured. Instead, he kills them all and escapes his room to the hallway. He finds 3 guards trying to take out Irina and her caretaker. After promising Irina about his return, he finishes them and heads out to begin his journey. As he snaps back to reality, Hilmes receives a report from Lord Sam informing him of the location of the Temple Knights. In the meantime, Andragoras refuses to take back Arslan's banishment. Arslan, with a heavy heart, accepts his punishment. Narcissus and Daryun humbly ask Andragoras to let them accompany the prince on his journey. Sadly for them, Andragoras didn't grant their wish. After the meeting with Andragoras, Narcissus, Daryun, and Jaswant all assembled to discuss the king's weird choice of decisions. Jeev and Farangus express their contempt for the king's decision to separate them from Pars. Arslan, on the other hand, takes one final look at the fortress before leaving. Andragoras initiates a meeting with Kishward to figure out whose side he's on. Kishward, to avoid issues, pledges his loyalty to Andragoras. Narcissus and Daryun are trapped in a room. After perambulating for minutes, Daryun asks Narcissus for his plan. Narcissus calms him down and writes down his plan to Daryun, just so the soldiers eavesdropping outside won't hear them. After explaining things to Daryun, Narcissus gives his people the go-ahead to kickstart the plan. Almost immediately, a fire is started, and the entire fortress is in chaos. Narcissus and the other 6 subjects of Arslan all sneak under the guise of chaos to escape outside. At the exit, they find Kishward and a few other men of Pars. Kishward checks to make sure he's still on Arslan's side, and puts up a little spar fight with Daryun just so he can lose and let them out. Plan works, and Andragoras doesn't suspect a thing. Narcissus and the other 6 head out to search for Arslan. Azrael the bird also follows them and leads them to Arslan. By dawn, Arslan is reunited with his loyal subjects of 7 devout followers. He's so happy to finally get them on his side again. Now he can carry on with his duties without worrying about his safety. He appreciates his people for coming back to him and chills out a little before continuing their journey to Gilan, a coastal city in the south. After traveling the wilderness for several days, Arslan and his 7 subjects finally near the port city of Gilan. With only a few dozen meters left, the lot is stopped and attacked by the Zot clan to be robbed. Alfarid walks forward and stops them from attacking her people. After realizing that their lady was still alive, the Zot clan members escort the lot to the port city the rest of the way. When it's time to depart, they bow down and thank Narcissus for taking care of their Alfarid. They also tell Arslan that they're now under their service, and they can be called upon anytime they need someone to help them out. For the first time in his life, Arslan sees the ocean. He's so full of joy and appreciation for his people for helping him realize one of his dreams. After seeing enough of the sea, Arslan and his people head into the heart of the city, the market. There, they checked out the vast variety of goods and merchandise the city had to offer. They almost get carried away by the good stuff there, but Ferengis quickly brings them back to order. Arslan looks over to the docks and finds the slave masters urging the slaves to get their stuff for them. Narcissus approaches him and tells him about his old friend, Shagad, who lives just a few clicks away from them. After getting all they wanted, Narcissus directs his people to Shagad's place. When they get there, Narcissus reunites with his old friend and plays just like old times. Even Arslan and the others are impressed at Narcissus for being this free with anybody. Shagad offers his services to Arslan and invites them in. During dinner by nightfall, Shagad and the lot discuss the recent occurrences around Pars. Arslan asks Shagad for help in amassing the 50k soldiers his father needs for his army. Shagad agrees to speak with the viceroy of the city for any help he can render. As for the slave abolishing decree, Shagad lets Arslan know that the port city of Gilan thrives on letting slaves do the hard work for them, so the merchants may not really side with Arslan on this one. Jeev gets curious and asks Shagad if he is truly on the master's side regarding abolishing slaves. Thankfully, Shagad shares the same insight, or at least he claims to. After dinner, Narcissus sits with his old friend to have a discussion. Shagad teases him a little about his wife, Alfarid, and then gets serious enough to talk about Arslan's ridiculous slave abolishment plan. From their discussion, Narcissus could suspect Shagad was also keeping slaves. He confronts Shagad about it, and Shagad doesn't deny it. He even tries to get Narcissus on his side and calls Arslan's dream immature. Narcissus gets very disappointed with his friend. He quickly cuts the discussion short before he says the wrong thing, and promises his friend that they'll be out of his hair in due time. Before leaving, Narcissus checks to make sure his friend's loyalty is still with the rightful heir to Pars. Shagad tells him there's nothing to worry about, and then he leaves. The following day, a popular ship led by Captain Grays arrives at the port of Gilan. In the meantime, Arslan and his people meet in the Viceroy's building to discuss their mission with him. They wait a few minutes for the Viceroy, but then he comes. Pelagius, the Viceroy, is a man of many words. He rushes in to meet the crown, but just can't keep his mouth shut at all. He treats them to a feast, and pouts a few unimportant things. When he gets serious, he tells them about the pirates and elusiveness. Arslan and his people seem concerned about the pirates pillaging their merchant ships at night and day. Pelagius gets emotional and cries himself away, leaving the prince and the others to discuss. Although there's something suspicious about Pelagius, Arslan and his people take his words seriously. A few minutes later, Ferengis draws everybody's attention to the dock. They find Grays' ship under attack by 2 loathsome pirate ships. Unable to do anything at the moment, Arslan and his people watch as the pirates board Grays' ship to defeat and pillage everything there. Thankfully, before things go out of hand, Arslan and his company arrive on a small ship and subdue the scalawags there. Grays smiles at the strong warriors as they send the pirates to the bottom of the sea. At one point in the battle, Daryun releases his deadly gaze on the soldiers and sends them running with their tails in between their legs. Grays is somewhat thankful to the people who came to save him. Moments after their fight with the scalawags, Grays and his men officially thank Daryun and his people for saving them from those idiots. Both parties stand and discuss a few more random things, before Grays invites them to a drink with him and his soldiers. On their way down their ship, Daryun introduces Grays to the crowned prince of the king of Pars, Arslan. Grays expresses clear shock over such a realization. Thankfully, he snaps out of it and takes the lot to a nearby tavern to drink and enjoy themselves. There, Narcissus and Arslan ask Grays to help them with 50k soldiers to satisfy his dad. Grays, on hearing such a request, sighs and tells Arslan that amassing that many soldiers would require a lot of money and time. However, to pay them back for saving his huge ship, he agrees to help return the favor and be their financial backer. Grays raises a glass and cheers to a new working relationship with the crowned prince. Now that they've gotten Grays to be on their side, Pelagius is the only person they have to convince. However, his talkative attitude makes it hard for them to trust him. Still, they agree to try their luck. Narcissus calls Ferengis, Jeev, and Jaswant to serve as integral people in his plan. He also turns to Graze and asks for his help to make his plan successful. Not much insight is given to the plan as the scene goes blank. In the next scene, Viceroy Pelagius is seen giving a court maiden a very important piece of document, covering all of his nefarious activities and telling her to store it in a very secure place. He also warns the woman to ensure that she's not being followed while doing so. After she's gone, Graze knocks on his door and sees himself in. He greets the Viceroy and offers a suitable lady he captured from his travels to Sarika as a present to his kind lord. Being the fool he is, Pelagius fails to recognize Ferengis' face. He accepts her wholeheartedly and sits with her and Jaswant, who was acting as her entourage, to eat and drink with her. Ferengis gets him drunk enough to lose his control over things. Then she begins asking incriminating questions. Meanwhile, the maiden from earlier finally arrives at the Gilan archive of records. She finds Jeev pillaging his way through the books and almost screams for help. However, Jeev charms her and urges her to surrender the document to him. The woman hands over the document without a second thought and even kisses him. When he's done with his own mission, he gets to Pelagius' window and gives Jaswant and Ferengis the OK signal. Ferengis immediately breaks character and ties Pelagius up to be presented against the crowned Prince of Pars. Even after he's caught, Pelagius still refuses to cave in to defeat. He even tries to put the blame on Ferengis and Jaswant for plotting against him. Poor man still couldn't tell the difference. Anyways, all evidence points against him and he asks for proof of him embezzling people's taxes and refunds. Then, Jeev returns with the document and proves him fully guilty of his crime. Arslan passes his judgment and strips Pelagius of his viceroy status immediately. After taking care of the dummy, Arslan returns the entire 200,000 pieces of silver Pelagius stole to the people of Gilan. While distributing the money, Shagad diffuses his thoughts known to Alam and Narcissus. Apparently, he really isn't interested in releasing such a heavy amount of money to the poor folks. He also lets Narcissus know how disappointed he is at him for siding with Arslan. Narcissus, who is hell-bent on Arslan's cause, tells him it's his joy to do what he does. He then lets Shagad know that they're after the pirates and their inside man. According to Narcissus, he suspects that there must be someone supplying those pirates information on each ship coming to the port every day. That's the only way they can know the right ship to attack and pillage. Shagad tries to explain to Narcissus that it's just business. Some people win and others lose. That's the natural order of life. Narcissus argues a little with Shagad before letting him go finally. After he's gone, he makes Elam know just how thankful he is that he didn't send him Gilan back then. At that moment, about 20 pirate ships approach the ports of Gilan to pillage the entire town. The captain of the entire fleet is hell-bent on getting all those riches for himself, despite his men's warnings about Daryun and the other dangerous members of Arslan's party. At one point, a pirate calls his attention to the terrible tidal current, pushing them further away from the port. Little did they know that Narcissus had already opened the dam of the city and released the water to the ocean, just so it could create an artificial tidal current that would push the pirates away from the city. When they're far enough, he moves on to the next part of the plan. Jeev controls several men to push logs of wood containing barrels of oil towards the ship, and then lights them all on fire. This plan seems to work just fine as several pirate ships are hit at a time. After thinning out the pirate ships, Graze and his men sail towards them to attack. Soon, Daryun shows up and sends fear directly into the hearts of the pirates. He directly challenges the captain of the pirates to surrender to a power greater than himself. The captain still tries to keep his men intact, but the fear in their hearts already stopped them from fighting since. Narcissus and the others are seriously impressed at Graze for keeping up with the speed and movement of the pirate ship. After the fight, they all capture the pirates and send them into their dungeons. Hours later, the inside man supplying the pirates information walks over to the dungeon to punish the captain for going against his orders. When the silhouette of the inside man is released, the traitor turns out to be none other than Shagad, Narcissus' old friend. 6 months after their conquest of Ecbatana, Lusitania was slowly losing its stronghold on the throne little by little. With each passing day, basic amenities like food and water became very hard to get. Things got even worse after Bodin was sent off from the capital. To get back Guiscard for plotting against him, he rallied the remaining knights under him and conducted a covert operation to destroy the capital's aqueduct. This operation was successful, and sent the inhabitants of the capital into famine and drought, as there was little water to go around. By June of the year 321 AD, Guiscard and his men faced heavy civil problems from the citizens of Pars and the soldiers of Lusitania. He is the acting king of the capital, as he already imprisoned his good-for-nothing brother Innocentus, and assumed his role as king of Pars. Nonetheless, life was never easy for him, as he always had one problem or the other to solve every day. On a random day in the month of June, Guiscard discovers that his own guards are calling for the massacre of the Parsians. Guiscard knows that this won't benefit him in any way, so he tells his soldiers to banish those ones seeking revenge on the Parsians. As for the aqueduct, he orders his men to tell the Parsians to speed up the repairs, so things can go back to normal. Just another day in the office for Giscard, I guess. Right outside the palace outskirts, Etoile can be seen walking around the yard thinking about herself, Arslan, and how to take care of the refugees she brought back to the capital with her. Along the way, a small piece of clothing falls on her head. She looks up and finds Innocentus peeking out the small window in his prison. He confirms Etoile's identity as a choir and tells her to help inform his brother, Giscard, that he's been imprisoned by his men. Poor Innocentus still didn't know his own brother imprisoned him there. After hearing all he had to say, Etoile rushes back to the city and devises a plan to catch Giscard alone so she can speak to him. She takes a peek at the poor people suffering around her, and recalls the piece of information Arslan left her before parting ways. She bends down and takes about 4 gold coins, so she can use them to buy foodstuff for the people. She keeps on wondering why a heathen like Arslan would care about the people more than her own people do. Anyways, Etoile waits till nightfall to sneak into the royal palace and steal some things just so she can meet with the king. Before she's caught, Giscard's soldiers capture Irina and call Giscard's attention to it. Giscard himself visits Irina in the tower where she was kept and requests for some time alone with her. When he gets it, he discusses a few things with her and lets her know his true identity. Hearing this, Irina gets very sullen that the man who attacked her small country was right in front of her. She tries to assassinate him, but Giscard pushes her away and leaves her be. In the meantime, her people, who are in the dungeons of Pars, contemplate the best ways to save the princess. Irina's entourage, aka Alfarid's elder brother, breaks himself out of the dungeon and heads off to save his princess. Giscard, on his way down from Irina's room, finds out about Etoile, a brat who stole into the palace and is seeking some time alone to discuss with him. Naturally, Giscard lets her in to hear what she has to say. Etoile tells him about the King Innocentus's imprisonment. Hearing this, Giscard plays along and makes Etoile believe that Innocentus is lying to him. After his meeting with the squire, Giscard plots something evil with his man and plays it all out that night. He lets Etoile lead Innocentus into Irina's room, knowing full well that Irina had a grudge against Innocentus, seeing as he's the king of the kingdom that killed her people. He'd hoped that Irina would use her knife to assassinate the king and finally get rid of his annoying big brother. Well, this plan works as Irina really did stab the king. However, Innocentus survived due to the fat in his big belly, which cushioned the deep wound. Almost immediately, the news about the king's assassination was made known to everybody. Giscard, however, gets the shock of his life when he finds out his brother is fine. He angrily walks out of the hospital and goes over to check out the scapegoat, Etoile. There, he orders Etoile and Irina's execution so they can sweep their crime under the carpet. At the point of the execution, Alfarid's younger brother stands nearby, ready to shoot down the executioner if it comes to it. Irina, in her final moments of life, prays for her safety on her way back to her family and accepts her fate. Just as the executioner is about to set her on fire, Hilmes and his soldiers arrive at the capital and rescue Irina at once. Giscard calls him and asks why he came back to rescue someone like Irina. Hilmes refuses to give him any answer. Instead, he just picks her up and rushes out of the palace. At the same time, Alfarid's brother saves Etoile and takes her to the edge of a balcony. There he finds out her real name and calls himself Alfarid's elder brother. Etoile is shocked and tells him that the name rings a bell. The elder brother asks him where his sister is, and Etoile tells her she's under Arslan. Hearing this, the elder brother gets ready to leave for Gilan. Etoile follows him as she claims to have something to tell him. Back in Gilan, Arslan and the others interrogate the captain of the pirate they captured and find out about a treasure island with millions of gold coins worth of treasure there. Arslan and his people, though they find this a bit disturbing, contemplate leaving Gilan to get the treasure for themselves. After obtaining such information from the captain of the pirates, Arslan and his party sail out of Gilan to pursue and claim the treasure. The night after they're gone, Shagad begins his plan. He sneaks and harbors close to 3,500 pirates to the city of Gilan and updates them about the prince's location. He tells them that the prince and his subordinates had already left the city defenseless for them to plunder in their absence. He also tells them to head towards the building of the viceroy and take it from them by force. From the looks of things, Shagad still didn't know why Narcissus was called the master tactician. Anyways, after giving his men the order, the pirates get into the nook and cranny of the city to take whatever they like. Most of them head into the dungeons to free their captured comrades, talking down on the prince and ensuring they have more numbers. Deep in the building of the viceroy, Arslan mandates his men to hold their ground and make sure the pirates don't get into the surroundings. Ilham and Alfarid wait for the pirates to get close enough. When they do, they begin raining arrows down from the wall. The pirates retaliate and send their own arrows towards the soldiers as well. Everything dies down when Shagad finally shows up and reveals himself as the mastermind behind the pirates and their nefarious activities. Ilham and Alfarid could not be more disgusted at Shagad's selfish actions. They talk down on his behavior and wish the ground would just open up and swallow him up. Shagad cuts the heavy talk and orders his men to break down the door. Again, everywhere goes silent, and Narcissus arrives with his own army. This time, he comes with the Zot clan as his reinforcements, and orders them all to get down the hill and fight Shagad and his men. He commends Ilham and Alfarid for holding Shagad down in his absence, and then commences his payback to Shagad for deceiving him. Arslan, upon finding out that Narcissus is already back, leaves his room and urges his men to keep fighting. Jaswant, Grays, and the others all gang up against the pirates who are pillaging the town and fighting them away. Jeev, on the other hand, incites the spirits of the commoners there to stand up and fight for their freedom. Shagad expresses his disappointment at Narcissus for keeping him in the dark about things. Narcissus also bursts his bubble, telling him that he's already seen through Shagad's plan right from the onset. Just as the fight's about to continue, Daryun shows up and chases Shagad away. Shagad bails and rushes through the city buildings, hoping to escape the Black Knight and his old friend. With Narcissus hot on his trail, he manages to get to his ship in time to begin sailing off the coast of Gilan. Narcissus, on the other hand, gets on the ship before it leaves the port to face his friend, Shagad. As the ship sails off to the horizon, Narcissus and Shagad clash swords, and their men do the same. Daryun and Grays get to the dock and set sail to pursue Shagad's ship. Back on Shagad's ship, Shagad asks his friend how and when he found out about his plans to double-cross him. Narcissus tells him he's known right from the beginning. Shagad gets irritated and asks Narcissus why he came back at such a time. Narcissus tells him he has a new focus in life and that Arslan is the person he so wishes to protect. Shagad continues his fight with Narcissus in deep regret. Daryun and his people show up a little while later and board Shagad's ship. Daryun fights all of Shagad's men, hoping to help him ease his friend's troubles. Narcissus, on the other hand, pauses his fight with his friend to discuss a few things about Arslan with him. When their fight continues, Shagad uses an unfair advantage to pin his friend down. However, Azrael the bird arrives just in time to distract Shagad. Narcissus uses this distraction to wound and incapacitate his friend. The following morning, Shagad and his people are captured and sent to Arslan for judgment. As they're being led away, Alfarid rushes over to her man to thank him for a job well done. Moments later, Shagad is made to sit and hear Arslan's judgment. Rather than sentence him to death, Arslan sentences Shagad to 1 year as a slave. He would be sold off to a wicked slave master and made to till the ground and work like a rat to make sure he knows what it feels like to be a slave. Even after getting the most humiliating punishment for him, Shagad still makes bold claims of coming back to seek his revenge on Arslan for defaming him. Daryun gets close to him and threatens to end him if he even thinks of harming the crowned prince. Arslan, on the other hand, calms him down and tells him that if he's truly a man of wisdom like Narcissus claims him to be, then will develop a heart during this 1 year of punishment. These words stick to Shagad as he frowns his face after hearing them. After the hearing, Narcissus takes a breather on a balcony to think about his new reality. Elam joins him and offers some words of advice to him. After their discussion, Narcissus finds a rainbow in the sky. Following their victory over the pirates, several wealthy men in Gilan came by to offer their support for Arslan and his cause. From then on, Arslan attacked the pirates' base of operations and captured all of them. Up next, the Zot received a banner as a symbol of their acts of bravery, and everyone was happy. By nightfall, Etoile and Alfarid's brother finally arrive at Gilan. When they arrive, Etoile gets on her knees and begs Arslan to save Innocentus from his callous brother, Guiscard. After hearing all the horrible things Guiscard did to his older brother back in Ecbatana, Arslan is in between a rock and a hard place, as he wonders what his next course of action will be. Back at the royal capital of Ecbatana, Guiscard orders his soldiers to take care of his brother and find the location of the Silver Mask. Not long after that, Guiscard's men figure out Hilmaz's location and attack him. Hilmaz takes note of Guiscard's attacks and finishes off his soldiers before they finish him off. Sam and Zande also come to his aid as they make their way swiftly to Zabul. In the meantime, Etoile begs Arslan to help save their king from Guiscard. Jeev runs his mouth and says a few insulting things to Etoile's intelligence. However, Farangi stops him in his tracks and urges to quit being disrespectful. A few moments from then, Alfarid rushes in to see Etoile. She gazes upon her elder brother, Merlane, and is terrified. She rushes all around the room to escape her elder brother's clutches. Merlane, on the other hand, chases after her, asking why she's been avoiding her role as the next chief of the Zot clan. Alfarid tells her brother that she has no interest in becoming chief of the clan. After hearing this, Narcissus and the others are very surprised at Alfarid's way of handling things. When all the hubbub dies down, Arslan officially welcomes Merlane to the palace and asks for some information about the palace. Merlane tells him that Guiscard is currently after a man named Hilmaz. Hearing this, Alfarid's eye lights up and she tells Merlane that Hilmaz was the one who killed their father. Merlane regrets letting Hilmaz slip away from his fingers, as if he could have done anything against him. Back at Peshawar Fortress, Andragoras and his queen, Queen Tahamane, rally up all the soldiers in the fortress in preparation to take down the Lusitanians at Ecbatana. Both Kishward and Kubard are worried about the king's sudden decision. Kubard, however, calms Kishward down, telling him to accept the new king as he is. As they walk, Kishward asks Kubard why he left the battlefield back then. Kubard indirectly tells him it's because he didn't want to die to the enemies. Kishward smiles and lets his friend go. That night, the wind blows down the secret message Variz sent Bahman down in Kishward's room. Kishward holds the letter and opens the scroll to check it out. However, before he gets to know about all its contents, Tahamane shows up and asks him to surrender the letter to her. When he does, Tahamane is summoned to meet the king and queen. There, the duo commend him for releasing the letter to them directly. Along the line, Andragoras picks up the letter with his sword and burns it to a crisp. After he's done, Andragoras tells Kishward some BS things and dismisses him. On his way back to the room, Kishward thinks about the secret he learned from the letter. He wonders whether or not Arslan is safe. The following day, Etoile arranges a meeting with Arslan and the others. Then he begs them to help him save their king and defeat Guiscard. In return, the Lusitanian army would leave the capital for the rightful owners. Narcissus and the others have no issues fighting to take their land back. However, they fear Etoile's words may not be true at heart. As Arslan wonders what to do about the matter, Elam rushes inside his office to inform him of Andragoras' army marching over to Ecbatana to reclaim their land. At the same time, Bodin and his Templar army present the sword of Ruknabad to the remaining believers of Yaldabaoth, and urges them to fight against the Parsians as they've been forsaken by the heavens. As he puts the sword down, he laughs at his own plan and smirks lightly. Sadly for him, Hilmis already knew where he was. He breaks into the building and attacks the temple knights with his comrades, Xanda and Sam. Bodin initially tries to attack Hilmis, but soon regrets after he finds out how powerless he is against him. Bodin retreats to his men and orders them to protect him. However, Hilms's power was just too strong for them. After chasing Bodin and his men, Hilms holds his sword up high as a signal of his ascension to the throne. In the meantime, Arslan makes his intentions known to the others. They're to go to Ecbatana and fight alongside the king to take back their lands. Although they're not as strong as they used to be, Arslan lets them know that he'll stop at nothing to rescue the honorable Lusitanians. Etoile was outside listening to Arslan and his people's discussion. When he's done, they let Etoile in. Arslan promises his people that they'll stop his father from ascending the throne no matter the cost. Etoile gets on her knees and thanks Arslan for even thinking about helping her out with her issue. A few clicks before Ecbatana, Andragoras and his army surface and raise their swords in battle against Guiscard and his men. On the other hand, Arslan finally arrives at the outskirts of the royal capital and invigorates his men to march towards Ecbatana to capture the royal capital. Arslan invigorates himself and urges his men to fight till their last breath as they march on towards victory. At this point, we have reached the end of our video. If you like it, do not forget to put the like button and subscribe for more new videos.